Somewhere over your house tonight there is a small red light that does not blink. It has hung there since before the first city, and it carries the name of a soldier. One people after another looked up at that red point and thought of fire, and blood, and war, and the name we kept for it is his. Mars to the Romans, Ares to the Greeks. And here is the strange part, the part worth staying up for. The god whose name we hung in the sky was the least loved god in his whole family. His own father said so, out loud, in words that survived 3,000 years. His sister outsmarted him. Giants stuffed him in a jar. The gods of Olympus caught him in a net, and the laughter of heaven rang around him while he lay in it. And still, when the greatest empire the ancient world ever built went looking for a father, they chose him. Tonight I am going to tell you his entire story, from his first day in the loudest house in heaven to the morning a spear went through him on the plain of Troy, through the trial, the scandal, the children he could not save, and the strange last victory nobody saw coming. You do not have to do anything but lie there. Think of yourself as a sentry tonight, posted at the quiet end of the line, and every sentry knows the one mercy of the watch. When your relief shows up, you sleep. Your relief is here. He has been standing this post for 3,000 years, and he has never once left it. So close your eyes if you want them closed. We start in the dust. It is the 10th year of the war at Troy, and the plain between the city and the sea has been beaten so flat by armies that nothing grows there anymore. 10 summers of marching have ground the earth into a fine, pale powder. And on this particular afternoon that powder stands in the air like smoke, chest high, stirred up by tens of thousands of men trying to kill each other in it. You can hear the day before you can see it. Bronze on bronze. A sound like hail on a roof that never lets up. Axles shrieking. Somewhere, a horse. And under all of it, steady as surf, the sound of men shouting themselves hoarse to keep their own fear at arm's length. Now find one man in that dust. His name is Diomedes, a young king out of Argos, son of a famous fighting father, and he is having the single greatest day any mortal soldier ever had. He is young, wide through the shoulders, and this afternoon something is burning in him that soldiers on both sides can feel before they can name it. He goes through the Trojan line the way fire goes through August grass. Men who have held their ground for 10 years look at his face and remember urgent business elsewhere. He has already wounded a goddess today. Aphrodite, herself, the lady of love, came down to pull her son out of the fighting, and Diomedes cut her wrist and sent her home crying to her mother. A mortal man drew immortal blood before lunch. That is the kind of day he is having, and there is something else about Diomedes this afternoon, something no man on that field can see. He is not alone in his chariot. Standing beside him, holding the reins, is a presence the dust does not touch. Keep that in mind. Hold it the way you hold your breath, because down at the other end of the field, the Trojan line is being rallied by someone the dust does not touch either. He is taller than the men around him, and he moves through the wreck of the afternoon like weather. And where he walks, broken men pick their spears back up. This is Ares, god of war. This field, this noise, this hour, all of it is his country, the one province in the universe that belongs to him alone. And he has come down into the middle of it because the side he loves is losing. Watch him come on. He has seen the mortal who is wrecking the Trojan day. And he goes for Diomedes the way a storm front goes for a small boat. Straight on, certain, gathering speed. The god strikes first. His spear comes over the chariot rail at the young king's heart. A killing throw from the strongest arm on the field. And in the air, something happens to it. A hand, no one can see, catches the shaft and turns it. Gently, the way you would redirect a child's toy. And the point slides past Diomedes and buries itself in nothing. Then the unseen hand closes over the mortal's spear and pushes. The point goes in low, under the plate of the god's armor, into the belly of war itself. And Ares screams. Homer measured that scream for us, and his measurement has stood for 3,000 years. He says, the god of war cried out as loud as 9,000 or 10,000 men shouting together in battle. One throat, doing the work of two armies. Both sides of the war stopped where they stood. Greeks and Trojans, killers and dying. Every man on the plain went cold at once, hearing a sound that sighs come out of the sky, and no one could say what it was, only that the afternoon had torn somewhere above them. Then the light changed. Men who were there said a darkness went up out of the field like a thunderhead climbing, up and north, dragging its own shadow, and was gone. That was him. That was the god of war, leaving the war. He did not stay to rally the line. He did not turn to see the spearmen finished. The immortal master of every battlefield since the beginning of battlefields left this one bleeding, driven off by a young king with somebody invisible on his cart. And the fighting closed over the place where he had stood, the way water closes over a stone. Now, I know what you are asking. Lying there, in the dark, you are asking how. How does the god of a thing lose at the thing? Whose was the hand on the spear? Why would heaven itself take sides against its own god of war? On his own ground, in front of everyone. I am going to answer all of it. But the answer starts a long way from Troy, back at the very beginning of him. And we have the whole night ahead of us. So we are going to walk there, not run. You have nothing to carry and nowhere to be. And remember the arrangement. Sentry, sleep when sleep comes. The story knows the way, and the watch is covered. And no one who matters will mark you absent. Here is where he began. Every family on earth has one marriage in it that the whole family lives around. The way a town lives around a volcano. On Olympus, that marriage was the king's, Zeus and Hera, brother of the sky and sister of the sky, king of the gods and queen of the gods, joined at the top of the world in the biggest wedding the universe ever threw, and at war with each other by breakfast. Understand what their marriage was, because our whole story is born out of the middle of it. It was an alliance between two superpowers. It was treaties and border disputes and long freezing silences that lasted a mortal generation. He went out into the world and did as he pleased. And the world is still full of the children he pleased himself into having. She stayed home and kept the books on every single one of his wanderings, and paid him back in ways that made poets cover their eyes. They loved each other, the way two storm systems love each other. Neither one ever fully won, and neither one ever left. And the halls of heaven learned to read the weather between them, the way farmers read a green sky. And out of that marriage, that actual marriage, the lawful one, came very few children. That is worth sitting with a moment. The king of the gods fathered half the pantheon on his travels. Apollo and Artemis came from another mother. Hermes came from another mother. Athena came out of the king's own head. No mother required at all. Born grown and grey-eyed and holding a shield. And her father took one look at her and loved her past all his other children, first and forever. But the son of the marriage itself, the boy with the two biggest names in creation on his birth certificate, born to the king and the queen in lawful order, in the honest way, was Ares. You would think that boy would own the place. Come look at the house he grew up in. The great hall of Olympus on a feast night. The one room in the universe with everybody in it. long tables of stone and gold, torchlight that never gutters, and the family arriving one by one, each of them bringing into that room the thing they are. Apollo comes in, and he is music and daylight, and the hall brightens because he is in it. Demeter comes in, smelling of harvest, and everyone at that table eats because of her, and everyone knows it. Hephaestus limps in with soot still on his hands, and there is not an object of beauty in the room he did not make. The cups, the thrones, the doors, the torches themselves. Hermes arrives last and laughing, with news from everywhere, and every head turns toward him the way flowers turn toward morning. Each of them carries a gift the family is glad to need. Light, bread, craft, word from the road. Their places at that table are not just seats. They are thanks. Now watch the son of the house come in. He is big, bigger than his father in some tellings. And he is beautiful. The old poets are clear about that. Hard and bright as new bronze. He is dressed correctly, and he comes in quietly. And watch what the room does. The room does nothing. Conversation continue. No one brightens. The seat that waits for him is a proper seat, high up the table, as befits the son of the king and queen, and the space around it is somehow always a little wider than the spaces around the other seats. The way the space around certain doors in certain buildings is wider. Nobody planned it. Nobody would admit to it. But every god in that hall knows what this particular son of the house is for. And what he is for is the one gift nobody wants to be glad about. Because think about what it means for him to be needed. When Apollo is needed, there is a song. When Demeter is needed, there is dinner. When this boy is needed, somewhere a wall has failed. A treaty has died. A harvest is burning. And men who were ploughing last spring are learning what the inside of a shield wall smells like. His gift only opens when every other gift in the family has already been refused. There are trades like that in every town in the world. Honest trades the whole community depends on, and the people who work them eat alone more often than they should. No one tells us about his childhood. I want to be straight with you about that. Tonight and all night. The old sources kept no stories of Ares small. No first steps. No schooling. And I will not invent what the Greeks did not keep. The record starts with him grown and armed, and it hands us his things instead of his youth. So let us take inventory the way the poets did. A spear with a heavy bronze head, kept bright, a shield, a helmet with a horsehair crest, and on his shoulders that particular gleam the Greeks always painted on him. The gleam of armor kept oiled and cared for. The one language of love he was fluent in, a war chariot, and yoked to it a team of horses with names like weather warnings, flame, terror, din, the team that pulls the noise of the world. And one more thing in the inventory, the strangest thing, the thing that tells you the most, an address. Every other Olympian kept house on Olympus. It was the whole point of the name. The family lived at the family seat, in the bright thin air above the clouds, together, the way the great houses of the earth kept all their generations under one roof. Zeus is there, and Hera. Athena has her place in her father's halls. Even Poseidon, king of a whole second realm under the sea, kept rooms on the mountain and used them. Ares kept his gear in the north, far below the mountain and far past the last Greek town, up where the maps of that age went vague and the winds came down off the steppes with snow in them in September. There was a hard country called Thrace, a land of horse herds and wolf winters and tribes who settled their lawsuits with spears. That is where the son of the king and queen of heaven chose to hang his helmet, among mortals, and hard ones at that. The one God whose parents held the whole mountain preferred the one country his family would never visit. The old sources do not explain the choice. And so tonight, neither will I. I will only ask you to lay those two pictures side by side on your way down towards sleep, because the whole story is already in them. A wide, quiet space around a chair in the brightest hall in the universe, and a light burning in a snow country, a long way north, where somebody's son keeps his own fire, among strangers who are glad to have him. What was he like when the call finally came, and the gift nobody thanked him for was needed after all? What did it look like when Ares took the field? That is the next watch of the night. Stay if you like. Sleep if you are ready. Either way, you will hear the horses. Before we go one step further, I want you to understand what it actually meant in the old world, when this god came to work, not the idea of him, the arrival, because the men who wrote him down were men who had stood in shield walls themselves, some of them, and when they described Ares coming onto a battlefield, they were not describing a theory. They were describing a change in the physics of an afternoon. It starts in the ground. That is the detail the old poets kept coming back to. Before anyone sees anything, the earth itself starts talking, a tremor climbing up through the soles of 10,000 sandals at once. The message every soldier's body understands before his mind gets a vote. Something heavy is coming. Horses feel it first, up and down the lines. War horses that have been trained past fear start backing and rolling their eyes, and their drivers stand up to look at a horizon that has not changed yet. Then it changes. There is dust, a long feather of it, and under the dust, a chariot moving faster than chariots move. And the sound arrives. And the sound is the thing no man who heard it ever found the full words for. Bronze wheels on hard pan, a team of divine horses at a dead run, blowing heat like open forges, and over it all a voice. His voice, not shouting words, but simply shouting, the way the sea does not need words. A wall of raw sound rolling out ahead of the chariot and breaking over both armies at once. Watch what the sound does, because this is his real weapon, and it is invisible. A shield wall is not a thing made of shields. Sentry, it is a thing made of nerve. It is 400 men agreeing, second by second, to stay. That agreement lives in the space between shoulders, in the breath of the man on your right, in the pressure of the man behind you, and it holds exactly as long as every man in it believes it holds. Now pour that sound into it. Watch the agreement flicker. A man in the third rank, a potter from a river town, feels his own legs asking him a question his officers cannot hear. The line does not break where the chariot hits. The line breaks before the chariot hits, somewhere back in the ranks, in the heart of one man, then 5, then 50, and the wall that held all morning comes apart the way a rope comes apart. One strand, then all of it at once. That was Ares. The armies of that age did not say, "We lost the field." They said the god got into the horses. They said the god got into the men, and let us be honest about what that meant. One time, plainly, because the night owes it. Every wall he ever broke was made of men like that potter. Farmers, tradesmen, somebody's sons on both sides of every line he ever touched. The Greeks called him bane of mortals, curse of men, and they were not being poetic. They were counting whatever else this night finds in him, and it is going to find a great deal. It starts here, with the plain fact that his trade was grief, wholesale, and everyone who prayed to him knew it, and he did not come alone. He never came alone, running beside the chariot, one at each wheel, keeping pace with horses no mortal team could match. Came 2 boys. They were his sons, The old poets name them without ever once describing their faces, and I think that was deliberate, because every soldier who ever lived has already seen them. The first was called Phobos, fear. The second was called Deimos, terror, dread, the cold weight that settles on a column of men the night before an assault, when the campfires burn low and nobody is saying much. Fear, who arrives in the moment, hot and sudden, the bolt through the chest when the arrows start. And dread, who arrives early and stays late, who sits down next to a man on the eve of battle and does arithmetic with him in the dark. Two brothers, division of labor, the family business, sit with what the Greeks did there, because they did it on purpose, and they did it honestly. They did not make fear the enemy of the war god. They did not put courage in his chariot. They looked straight at the thing every veteran knows and every parade forgets. That fear is not the opposite of war. Fear is the product of it, the firstborn of it, and they wrote it into the family tree. Where the father goes, the sons go. No battle in the history of battles has ever been fought without both boys present and working. Hold on to those two names tonight. Sentry, Phobos, and Deimos. Let them run alongside us the rest of the way, heaping pace at the wheels where they belong, because before this night is over, in the very last minutes of the watch, those two boys are going to show up one more time, in a place so far from Troy and so close to your own back door that I promise you are not guessing it. That is not a riddle to keep you awake. It will keep. Everything tonight will keep. There were others in that terrible company. A sister of the battlefield called Enyo ran with him in some tellings. An old grim power of the sack of cities. And strife was there too, who loved the quarrel itself the way her brother loved the fight. The poets give Ares a whole staff of horrors. And then, having assembled it, they tell you something almost gentle. All of it. The sound, the suns, the shaking ground. All of it answered to one being. And that being did not plan. Athena planned. Athena stood over battlefields the way an architect stands over drawings, moving strength from wing to wing, spending men the way a banker spends money. Passion, bloodless, always solvent. Ares was in the dust with the potter from the river town. Where the line buckled, there he was. Where it was worst, there he was. Actually there, shoulder height with mortals, close enough to catch. The god of the generals watched from above, the god of the soldiers you had to look for in the crowd. It cost him. We will spend the whole night counting what it cost him. But that is the picture I want you to fall toward as this chapter lets you go. Not the breaking line. Not the noise. Afterward, the field quiet again. The dust settling in the long gold light. And a chariot standing still at the edge of it all. Horses blowing, and two boys leaning against the wheels, catching their breath, waiting for their father, who is the last one to leave. He was always the last one to leave. It was his field. After all, somebody has to walk it when it is over, and it was never going to be anybody else. Let the battlefield go now. Let the dust settle all the way down, and come north with me, because the day is over, and the god is going home, and home is worth seeing. You learn a man from his country the way you learn him from his hands, north of the last Greek city, north of the last olive tree. The world of that age changed its mind. The tidy country of terraces and harbors gave out, and the land opened up and got serious. Plains wide enough to lose an army in, rivers with ice in their voices, mountains that held snow on their shoulders into June. And beyond them, the wind came straight down off the top of the world, with nothing to slow it but grass. The Greeks called it Thrace, and they said the north wind himself kept a house there. and they were only half joking. It was horse country, wolf country, a hard, beautiful, unfenced land where winter was not a season so much as a landlord. The people matched it. The Thracians were real, an actual people the Greeks knew and traded with and feared a little. And the stories they told about them all ran the same direction. Tall riders, red-haired, some of them tattooed, wrapped in fox skin against the cold. They loved horses the way the Greeks loved ships, and they loved a fight the way sailors love weather. As a fact of the world you might as well be good at. A Greek farmer prayed for peace and planted his field. A Thracian chief prayed for glory and named his spear. Two different answers to the same hard world, and neither one was wrong. And they knew it about each other, and it was there, among those people, at the cold end of every map, that the God of War kept his house. Think about how strange that is, and how nobody in the old stories ever seems to find it strange. Olympus was the address of addresses. Gods fought to be there. The whole shining family clustered at that one summit like lamps on one table. And the higher your seat in the hall, the closer to the fire you wintered. Ares had a seat by birthright at the head of everything. Son of the king, son of the queen. And he took his gear and moved to the frontier. The poets mention it in passing. The way you mention a known thing, Ares of Thrace, Thracian Ares, when the net fell on him in the scandal we will come to later in the night. Where did he go to be out of the laughter? Thrace, when the war at Troy spat him out. Where did the darkness, climbing off the field, bend, north toward? Thrace, every road in his story that does not lead to a battle leads there. To the snow, to the horses, to the one country in the world where his trade was not a scandal. No one tells us why, and you know our rule by now. But I will show you what the north had that the mountain did not. And you can carry the difference down into sleep and weigh it there. On the mountain, his gift sat under glass, needed and unthanked, the fire extinguisher of heaven. In the north, the Thracians looked at the business of arms and saw an honest trade. Their kings were buried with their horses and their spears. In high mounds, a man can still stand on today. Out in the grass, their smiths made helmets that museums keep under soft light now. Silver and gold. Beautiful work. Craftsmanship you would swear belonged to a gentler subject. They did not think war was good. Sentry. Nobody who lives close to it thinks that. They thought it was real. The way winter is real. And they gave it honest workmanship and honest respect. And in their country, the god of it could sit at a fire without the space around his chair going wide. So picture the house the stories never quite describe. And let me be plain with you the way we agreed to be. The old poems give him the country and stop there. The hall I am about to hang in it is mine. Built out of the country, they gave him, and I think it is built true. A long hall in the snow, timber and stone. Nothing gold about it. Horses in a paddock, shaggy in their winter coats, breath standing in the blue air, a fire that somebody keeps well, because he was always careful with his gear, and a spear, standing by the door, the way a working man's boots stand by a door. Outside, the wind coming down off the roof of the world, crossing 1,000 miles of grass to rattle one door latch. Inside, the son of the loudest house in heaven, sitting quiet at his own hearth, in a country that asked him no questions, a long way from a table where the talk went silent when he sat down. The old world put its god of war in the far north, out past the last warm harbour, and then found that fact so natural it never once stopped to explain it. That is the kind of silence you can trust. Some truths get written down, and some just get an address. Let the fire burn down a little. Let the wind have the night. He is home. The gear is dry. The horses are fed. And nothing anywhere needs him yet. It will not last. Off south, in the soft country, two brothers are growing, and they are growing wrong. A foot taller every year, and they have begun to look at the mountain of the gods the way builders look at a lot. The next watch of the night belongs to them, and to a bronze jar. And to 13 months the family upstairs never even noticed was missing. Sleep if you are sleeping. Sentry, the north wind has the post till morning. Trouble, when it finally came for him, did not come from an enemy. It came from two boys who wanted the sky. Their names were Otus and Ephialtes, and the Greeks called the pair of them the Alodai. And everything about them was wrong in the way that certain weather is wrong. Quietly at first, then all at once, they were the sons of Poseidon, which mattered, because the blood of the sea runs big. Most children grow. These two accumulated. The old accounts put numbers on it that sound like a tall tale until you hear them, said plainly. A cubit wider every year. A fathom taller. 9 years old, and already the size of siege towers. And still going. And handsome. The poets add, strangely, almost sadly, after Orion, the handsomest men the wide earth ever fed. Two beautiful boys the size of weather, out in the soft southern country, getting bigger every spring, and beginning to have ideas. The idea they are famous for came later, and it was the one that finished them. They decided to reach heaven itself, and being builders at heart, they worked out the engineering, stack the mountains, take Ossa, set it on Olympus, take Pelion of the tall pines, set that on Ossa, and walk up the pile like a staircase to knock on the sky. The gods heard about the plan the way you hear about a far-off storm, with a little laugh that dies partway out, because the terrible thing about the Alode was that nobody upstairs was entirely sure they could not do it. But before the mountains, before the famous madness, they did something smaller and stranger, and it is the reason they are in our story. Nobody fully explains why, and I will not invent a grudge the sources did not keep. What the record hands us is only the deed itself. Sudden and complete, they caught Ares. Say it slowly, because the old world said it slowly. Two giants, still half-boys, laid hands on the God of War himself, and held him, the strongest arm on any battlefield, the terror of shield walls, the power that broke armies with sound alone. Taken, however it happened, ambush or challenge or bald, overwhelming strength. The sources keep the result and not the fight. They bound him in chains, and then they did the thing that made the story immortal. They folded the God of War into a jar of bronze, and they closed the lid. Now, come inside. Sentry, I am sorry to bring you in here, but the whole meaning of this chapter is inside. Bronze, all around, and darkness total, not the dark of night, which always has a little charity in it. A star, a sill of grey under a door. This is the dark of a closed metal room the size of a crouching man. There is no lock to work at from within, because the lid is the lock, and the lid answers only to hands outside. Sound behaves horribly in a bronze jar. His breath comes back at him off the curved wall before it has even finished leaving, and when he does the thing he is best at in all the universe, when the God of War fills his chest and lets go that battle roar that stopped 2 armies at Troy, the roar that Homer measured at 10,000 throats. The bronze catches it, folds it, and hands it back to him. All of it. His own thunder poured over him in the dark. Outside, it came through as something small, a humming in a jar. His strength was the same strength. His voice was the same voice. The walls simply declined to care. And there is no argument on earth or over it that a man can win against a wall. So he waited, And here the old story turns its knife. So gently you could miss it. He waited 13 months. The Iliad itself keeps the number 13. A year, and then 1 more month for good measure. And I want you to walk that year with me at the speed it actually passed. A summer went by over that jar. The grass around it went gold, then grey. Rains came, and the bronze ticked and cooled, and winter sat down on the lid, and the dark inside grew cold enough to see your breath in. If there had been anything to see by, then the world softened, and birds came back to whatever country hid him, and a whole spring happened, seed to sprout to leaf, while the god of war sat folded in the black with his own returned breath for company. Now I have to tell you what the record says about the search for him, and I will tell it exactly, because the exactness is where the ache lives. The record says nothing. The poem gives us the capture, and the 13 months, and the rescue, and in between there is silence. No line about an alarm raised. No line about a father asking questions or a mother at a window. Silence in an old poem can hold anything, and honesty makes me say so. Maybe heaven searched and the searching simply went unsung. But the poem does tell us one thing more, and it is the thing I cannot read any other way. It says, he came within an inch of wasting away in there. It says, the god of war would have been lost, actually lost, if one person had not finally spoken up. Whatever the family did or did not do for 13 months, it was not enough to find him, and it was very nearly not enough to save him. The feasts on the mountain ran their course that whole year. Torchlight and nectar, and the long golden evenings of the deathless. The empty chair at the high table sat empty, with that wide, quiet space around it. And the space, as far as any surviving line of poetry knows, simply went on being quiet. The one who finally moved was not family at all. Not close family, anyway. It was the stepmother of the giants, a woman named Eriboa, who knew what her stepsons had buried and could not carry it any longer. And she whispered it. And the whisper found the one god in the family built to receive whispers, Hermes, the messenger, the god of roads and luck and locked things, the one Olympian on speaking terms with every back door in the universe. And it is right. Somehow, it is perfect, that the rescue of the god of force was a job for the god of slyness, done quietly. At night, in my imagining of it, no army raised, no thunderbolt asked for, just a slight figure crossing the dark country alone, finding the jar by whatever means Hermes finds things, and putting his clever hands to the lid. The poets give us no reunion scene, and by now you know what I do with their silences. I hold them up to the light, and I tell you they are silences, and then I set down what I see in them. No feast for the returned son is anywhere in the record, no father's embrace, no accounting demanded of the giants by an outraged family. The lid came off, and a god who had spent 13 months folded in his own echo stood up out of the dark, near worn out, the Iliad says, at the very end of himself, and the record moves on to other business, and that is all. So I will give him the scene the poets did not, and I will say plainly that it is mine. Let it be plain, like his house, the North Country. Weeks later, the long haul in the snow, the fire kept well, the horses shaggy at the fence, and the master of the place sitting at his own hearth of an evening, whole again, his gear oiled and hung, and nobody in all the wide grasslands rude enough to ask their neighbor where he had been for a year. A country that asks no questions is a mercy. Sentry, when the questions have no good answers, and the north wind, which has held the post all this while, holds it a little longer. As for the giants, the sky settled its own account with them in time, and it did not need Ares to do it. Their mountain staircase never got built. Pride, the size of weather, draws lightning, one way or another, and theirs did. And that is a tale for a different watch. Our road goes elsewhere, south and east of the snow country, in a land the God of War held sacred. There is a spring coming up cold, out of a rock, in a green hollow, in a silence that is not empty. Something lives at that spring. It is his. It is old, and it is about to meet a stranger with a sword. And out of that meeting a whole famous city is going to grow. Sleep if you are sleeping. The next watch has a dragon in it. But the dragon is a long way off, and the fire here is warm, and nothing needs you yet. There was a man walking the roads of Greece with everything he owned and no home to point it at, and his name was Cadmus, and his trouble was a promise. He was a prince of Tyre, off east, across the water, a Phoenician, which in that age meant a man of ships and letters and long horizons, and his sister had been stolen, Europa. The girl the king of the gods himself carried off over the sea in the shape of a white bull, and that is its own story for its own night. What matters to our road is the order their father gave when the girl vanished. He called his sons and said, "Find your sister, and do not come home without her. Bring her back, or no return at all." So Cadmus sailed and searched and asked at every harbour, and of course he never found her, because you do not find what heaven has taken. And slowly the search wore down into wandering, and the wandering wore down into a question. If a man cannot go home, where does he go? He did what the sensible of that age did with a question too big to carry. He took it to Delphi, to the oracle, and the oracle gave him one of the great answers, strange and practical at once. "Stop searching," the god told him. "Your sister is not your road anymore. Leave this place, and out in the open country you will meet a cow, a particular cow, marked with the sign of the moon on her flank. Follow her. Do not drive her. Do not lead her. Follow, and where she lies down of her own accord, there build your city. There is something in that oracle that has always felt kind to me, and I will let you feel it rather than explain it." A man who could not stop looking was told to let something else do the looking. So he did. He found the cow, exactly as promised, out among the herds of Phocis, and he fell in behind her, and the strangest founding march in the old stories began. A prince and his handful of companions walking at cow speed across the middle of Greece, mile after slow mile, day after day, until one afternoon, in a broad green country of low hills, the animal stopped and folded her legs and lay down. Here, then, wherever here was, the city would be called Thebes, and it would become one of the great names of the ancient world. And it began right there, with tired men standing around a resting cow in the grass. First things first. And the first thing was water. A city needs a spring, and a sacrifice of thanksgiving needs water besides. So Cadmus sent his men out to find some, and off in the green folds of that country they found it, the best kind. A spring coming up cold and endless out of the living rock, in a hollow shaded by old trees, the ground around it soft and green in a dry land, almost too good. The men bent to fill their jars, and the hollow moved. Out of the cave behind the water it came, and the old poets spent their best bronze describing it. A serpent, a dragon, huge past sense, scaled in a bronze that caught the light the way armor catches it, with a crest on its head like a war helmet, and eyes with fire far down in them. This was no stray monster that had wandered in and made a den. And this is the turn to hold on to. Sentry. The spring had an owner. The dragon was sacred to Ares. The war, God's own creature. In some tellings, his own blood. set over that water in the deep past for reasons old, even then, and for all the long years since. It had kept the one law of the place. Everything that comes to the spring answers to me. The men of Tyre never stood a chance, and the poem does not pretend they did. It was over before their swords cleared, and Cadmus, waiting back at the resting place with the cow and the fire ready and no water coming, finally walked out to find his people, and found what was left of them, and found the owner of the spring waiting in the trampled green, blood on its bronze, unashamed, entirely within its rights as it understood them. What happened next made his name for 3,000 years. A prince with no country, the last of his company, alone at the edge of the hollow with everything already lost, looked up at the war, God's dragon, and did not leave. Ovid gives him a great growled line at this moment. Either avenge your friends or join them, and whether he said it or only lived it. That is what happened. The fight was long and it was ugly, and I will keep it at the pace of a story for sleeping. The spear that glanced off the scales, the tree splintering where the head struck, the man learning, dodge by dodge, the way soldiers learn, the rhythm of the thing that was trying to kill him, and at the end of it, the one clean thrust, pinning the crested head to an oak, and the long body unwinding down the trunk like a flag coming down, and then the hollow silent, and a man alone by the water, breathing, alive, with a dead god's beast at his feet, and no idea in the world what he had just started. He was still standing there when the air beside him spoke. Athena, grey-eyed, arrived from nowhere the way she always arrives, calm as a surveyor, and the counsel she gave him at that spring is one of the strangest instructions in all the old stories, and neither she nor anyone since has ever explained the mechanics of it. And we will honor the mystery. Take the dragon's teeth, she said, plough this ground, and sow the teeth in the furrows like seed. He did it. That is the magnificent thing about Cadmus. He simply did it. A man too far from home to argue with anything anymore. He broke the meadow by the spring with a plough, and he walked the furrows, dropping teeth into the earth one by one, planting the dead. And then he stood back to see what kind of harvest a war god's blood makes. The ground swelled, and then, all along the furrows, the earth cracked the way it cracks over any seed in spring. And what came up first, glinting in the light, was spear points, then helmet crests, rising like terrible stalks, then faces, shoulders, shields, whole men, grown men in full armor, climbing up out of the ploughed field the way crops come, row on row, a standing harvest of soldiers where, an hour ago, there had been grass, armored men, born angry, of the dragon's tooth and the war god's line. They looked at the daylight, and at each other, and it went exactly the way you would guess. Cadmus, one man, watching a field grow an army, threw a stone into the middle of them, and no one saw where it came from. And each new man blamed his neighbor, and the harvest set upon itself. Brother, cutting down, brother in the furrows they had just been born from, until the field lay quiet again, and only 5 were left standing. 5, breathing hard, looking around at the morning, and those 5, the sown men, the Spartoi as Thebes would always call them, lowered their spears, and made their peace, and became the first fathers of the city, the founding families whose descendants would walk those streets for 1,000 years, claiming, with straight faces, that their people came up out of the ground already armed. Every city has its founding stock. Sentry, one famous city was seeded from a dragon's jaw, and knew it, and said so on its monuments, but there was still a debt. The dragon had been sacred, and its owner was not a forgiving landlord. And heaven does not let the killing of a God's own creature pass on a technicality, even a killing done in grief, even one done in self-defense. The judgment came down, and the sentence is recorded plainly. For the blood of the beast of Ares, Cadmus would serve Ares 8 years, one long divine year in the old reckoning. The founder of Thebes labored in bondage to the god whose dragon he had killed, his city waiting on him the whole while. The stories keep no scene of master and servant, no words between them. And by now you know I will not invent any, only the fact of it. 8 years of a proud man's life, paid out day by day to the north, and then the strangest turn of all, the one nobody ever sees coming. When the 8 years were done, the debt did not end in a grudge. It ended in a wedding. That is the truth. And it is coming. And it is one of the finest hours in this whole long night. A wedding, the like of which the world had not seen and would only ever see once more. The gods themselves will come down the mountain for it, and sit at mortal tables as guests. There will be a bride whose very name will pay off everything this dark stretch of the story has cost us. And there will be a wedding gift, a small, beautiful, glittering thing, made by a master's hands, that will outlive everyone at that feast and go down the generations of Thebes, collecting sorrow like interest. But a wedding needs a bride, and the bride of this one has not been born yet, and her mother and father have not yet done the thing that scandalized heaven. That is the next country of the night, and it is warmer than this one. We are done with jars and dragons for a while. The watch ahead is about a daughter in Athens first, and a grey stone hill, and then the goddess of love herself, and the one door on Olympus that opened for our soldier when every other door stayed shut. Let the spring run cold in the dark behind us. 5 soldiers are guarding a city that is one day old. Everything is planted. Everything keeps. The part of Ares almost nobody remembers is the part I get to tell you now, and the old record keeps it plainly. He loved mortal women sometimes, and, unlike his father, he made no legend of it. One of them was an Athenian, Loudest, a daughter of the old royal house of that city, and with her he had a girl, and the girl was named Alcippe, a granddaughter of kings on one side, a daughter of war on the other, and she grew up in Athens, mortal, young, walking the same lanes and springs as every other daughter of that town. In the years when Athens was small and new, and the great rock at its center had barely begun to carry temples, now I have to bring a shadow into the story, and I will do it the way the old sources did, briefly and at a distance, and then we will deal with what came of it. There was a young man in that country called Halirrhothios, and he was a son of Poseidon, blood of the sea, princely and strong, and used to the wide margins that the sons of gods were given in that age. And near a spring, outside the city, he came upon Alcippe alone. What he did there, the ancient writers set down in a word and turned away from, and I will turn away with them. It was the oldest crime. It was done to a girl by a man who believed, the way the powerful of every age believe, that no bill for it would ever find him. The sons of gods did as they pleased in those days. Century. The whole long record of the myths is heavy with girls who had no one to answer for them. This girl had a father. The stories do not say how Ares knew. Maybe a god simply knows. The way a mother in a far wheat field once felt a rope snap in a deep room of the world. What the stories do say is what he did, and how fast. He came to that spring while the ground still held the story of what had happened on it, and he found Halirrhothios, and he killed him. There, at once, with his hands or his spear. No summons issued. No complaint filed with the boy's father. No ransom named. The record gives the deed one sentence and no apology. And standing where we stand tonight, knowing this family, you can hear how enormous the moment is inside that one sentence. Because count the fathers of Olympus for me. Sentry. Count the gods who watched their mortal daughters carried off, cornered, wronged, turned into trees and heifers and echoes to escape the appetites of that shining generation. And then count the ones who came down in time and struck the blow and stood over it. The count is one. The least loved god on the mountain is the one on record answering for a daughter as though she outweighed the sky. But a god's son lay dead. And that god was the sea. And the sea does not absorb losses quietly. Poseidon rose up in a rage the coasts could feel. And he went to the mountain. And he did the thing nobody had ever done. He demanded a trial, not vengeance, which was the old way and his right by custom. Trial. Let the family sit in judgment. He said, let Ares answer for blood in front of the assembled gods, formally, with accusation and defense, and let the household of heaven say out loud whether this killing was crime or justice. Understand what did not exist yet. Courts, juries, the whole patient machinery your own country trusts its worst mornings to. The room where anger is made to sit down and take turns talking. None of it had been invented. Up there or down here, in the world as it stood, blood answered blood, and the strong collected, and that was the whole of the law, what Poseidon called for in his fury, without meaning to invent anything, was the first hearing of a murder case in the history of the universe. They held it on a hill, a bare shoulder of grey limestone standing off the side of the great rock of Athens. Low, wind scoured, room enough on its flat top for a small assembly and no more. 12 gods came down and took their seats on the raw stone. No thrones carried down for the occasion. No hall built. And I have always thought the bareness was the point, though no source says so, and you know I will tell you when I am guessing. The accuser stood on one side, Poseidon, lord of a third of everything, salt still in his voice, laying out the death of his son, and, on the other side, standing to answer, the god of war. Take one breath and see it from where he stands. Every face on those stone benches is family. The sister who outshines him, the uncles who barely know him, somewhere among them the father who has never once been glad to see him coming. In the whole of his long existence, this family has handed him the wide silence around his chair, and a jar the surviving record shows no search for. And now they will hand him a verdict. He has no advocate. The accounts give him no speech, and I will not write him one. I think he told it the way soldiers tell things. Here is what was done to my daughter. Here is what I did about it. Then the wind on the hill, and 12 of the deathless weighing the two sentences against each other. They acquitted him, the gods of Olympus, sitting in formal judgment on their least favorite son, heard the case and let him go. Justified. The verdict ran. The blood he spilled answered blood guilt, already owing, and the family that had never given him a feast, a rescue, or a kind word at table, gave him the one thing it turned out he could actually win from them, which was a fair hearing. He came down off that hill a free god, and the hill itself never got over it. From that day into this one, through every age of the city that grew up around it, that bare limestone shoulder has carried his name, the Areopagus, the Hill of Ares, the place where the first gavel in the history of the world came down, and came down on the side of the god. Everyone had already made up their minds about, mark this hill, sentry. I mean it the way I mean My few promises. Set it in your memory with a stone on top, because we are not finished with it, not by a long watch, near the end of the night, with the whole story told. I am going to walk you back up that grey rock one last time, and when we stand on it then, you will see what grew from it, and I will show you the crowd. And the crowd will be full of faces, you know. It will keep. On this night, everything keeps. The trial ended. The gods went up the mountain. The sea went back to its grievances. And Athens kept the hill and, in time, built a city of marble around it. And Ares went north, home, to the fire and the horses. A father who had answered for his child and been called just by the very family that could not love him. And it is there, in the north, with the snow coming early off the roof of the world, that the next part of the story finds him. Because one evening the last visitor anyone in heaven would have predicted is going to arrive at that far northern door, the most wanted presence in creation, the one being every hall on the mountain fought to seat closest to the light. She chose the hall at the cold end of the map. The next watch is hers. To tell it right, I have to start with a wedding, and the wedding is not his. When Aphrodite came into the world nearly stopped working. You have heard some version of her arrival. The sea foam, the shell, the goddess stepping ashore on Cyprus with the tide still on her ankles, and roses coming up out of dune grass where her feet fell. What the stories agree on, under all their variations, is the effect desire itself had put on a body and joined the family. And the family, which ran on rivalry at the best of times, looked at her and began quietly losing its mind. Every unmarried god on the mountain, and several of the married ones, wanted her. And wanted is a soft word for it. Zeus watched the currents moving through his own halls, suitors circling, brothers eyeing brothers, and the king did, the arithmetic kings do. A prize like this, left standing open, would crack Olympus down the middle, so he married her off, fast, by decree, and to the last god anyone expected, not to the handsomest, not to the strongest, to Hephaestus, the smith, the lame god of the forge, soot to the elbows, the maker of everything beautiful on the mountain and, by the family's cruel accounting, the least beautiful thing on it. You can read the king's logic like a ledger, and it was not stupid. Give her to a vain god and feed a feud. Give her to the humble craftsman who wants only his workshop. Bank the fire safely, and buy peace. On the ledger. It balanced perfectly. It was also, and here is the whole trouble in one line, a marriage nobody asked her about. This family arranged its women. Sentry. You have watched them do it on other nights, if you have kept other watches with me. A nod in a bright hall, deciding a life. Aphrodite, the one power before whom all creation bent, was handed to a husband by decree, and the decree assumed that desire itself would settle down and keep house because a king found it convenient. Desire does not keep house. She was not cruel to him. The record is fair on that, and he loved her, in the way of a maker with one treasure, which is its own long ache of a story. But her heart went where it went, because that is the one law of her whole department, the law she herself embodies and cannot repeal. And where it went, of all the bright doors on Olympus standing open to her, every hall hoping, every god angling for the honor of her company, where it went was north, out of the light, off the mountain, down the long map, to the cold country, to a timber hall in the snow where a spear stood by the door. She chose Ares. The poets never explain it. 3,000 years of commentary have chewed on it. And tonight We are not going to join the chewing, because the story is better told than solved. But I will set the two of them side by side and let you look, because the looking is honest. Every other god approached her as a prize to be won, a crown for their own vanity. The record of Ares holds nothing of the kind. No scheming for her, no bargaining with her father, no contest entered. Whatever passed between war and love began away from every eye in heaven. And the sources hand us only the plain, astonishing fact of it. The one door that opened for him all his long life opened on its own, from the inside. And standing in it was the one being on the mountain that all the others would have burned their seats to be chosen by. So picture the two of them where the vase painters of Greece pictured them, because this part is not my invention. It is theirs, worked in red and black clay 100 times over. They painted him in her company with the helmet off. That is the detail those old craftsmen kept choosing, over and over. The war god, unarmed. The spear leaned against a wall with the household things. Eros small and laughing between them. The painters of Greece looked at the loudest god in the family and drew him quiet. Somewhere south, the mountain glittered and gossiped and held its feasts. And neither of the two by that northern fire could have cared less. And for a strange, still stretch of the old record, nothing happened at all. No battle called him. No scheme required her. The loudest god and the most pursued goddess in creation. In the one house in the world where nobody wanted anything from either of them. I would like to leave them there. Some nights I do. But you know, and I know, and, worse than anyone, the two of them knew what the arrangement was resting on. She was married by the king's own decree, to the good patient smith in his workshop under the mountain. And what the North Country held was not a courtship. It was a secret, and a secret on Olympus is a creature with a short life, because of one particular fact of the old cosmology. One fact hanging over every hidden thing that was ever done under the open sky. The sun sees everything. You remember him. Sentry. If you have kept other watches, with me. Helios, the witness, driving his burning team up over the rim of the world every single morning without one missed day in the history of days. The great eye to whom courts and kings appealed. The keeper of the ledger. No curtain was ever thick enough to close. His route runs over everything. Over Troy, over Athens and its grey hill, over a certain meadow on a certain island. On a morning we both remember, and on one particular morning, with winter loosening in the North Country and the light coming earlier, his route ran over Thrace, over the snow, over a timber hall with its fire burned down to embers. And the great eye of the world happened to look down. What he saw there was what you already know. He saw. He did not slow the horses, because the day has a schedule, and the schedule does not gossip. But the sun keeps what he sees. We learned that together on another night, standing on a ridge with two grieving women. He keeps it like a hot coal, all day, the whole burning circuit of the sky. And in the evening, when the team went down into the western sea, the coal went with him, and he carried it, still glowing, to a workshop under the mountain, where a patient man was working late. The workshop under the mountain never really closed. That is the first thing to know about Hephaestus. While the halls upstairs feasted, the smith worked, and everything the feasters touched had come out of his fire. Their cups, their thrones, the doors that swung at their approach, the self-moving tripods that served their tables, the very locks on their treasure rooms. The family had a way of forgetting that, and it is the exact thing they should never have forgotten. Every beautiful object on Olympus was proof of one quiet fact. The lame god understood how things are made, and how they hold together, and how they come apart. better than anyone in creation. Into that workshop, in the evening, came the sun. Helios told it plainly, because the witness of oaths has no other setting. Your wife, the war god, the house in the north, and not once, and not new. The old poem does not linger on the smith receiving the news, and I will match its restraint, because what a man's face does in that minute belongs to him. What the poem gives us instead is what Hephaestus did next, and what he did next is the whole chapter. He did not go north with a hammer. He did not stand in the hall of Zeus demanding justice, though the marriage was the king's own arrangement and the case was clean. He heard the news all the way through, thanked the witness, in my imagining of it, the way you thank a doctor for a hard diagnosis, and turned back to his anvil, and he began to make something. What he made, over the days that followed, was a net, but the word is too small for it. Working alone, telling no one. The smith drew bronze out to a fineness no eye could follow. Links finer than spider silk. The poem says, fine as the threads a spider hangs across a morning doorway, and stronger than any chain ever hung on any prisoner. Thousands of links, each one perfect, each one invisible, woven into a mesh that could hold a struggling god the way a web holds a fly, and all of it weighing nothing, and all of it impossible to see even if you knew where to look. The greatest craftsman in the universe put his whole genius into one object, and the object was a question: who is in my bed? He carried it home. He hung it with a rigger's care over his own marriage bed. From the rafters, down the posts, a canopy of nothing. Then he announced, where the household could hear it, that he was leaving for Lemnos, his favorite island, on business of the forge, and he walked out the front door with his tools on his shoulder, and the house watched him go. You know what happened next, because it is what always happens next. Word moved. The husband is away, and down from the north, or in from whatever errand held him, came Ares, quick as wanting, through the front door of the smith's own house. The poem is honest about the shabbiness of it, and so will I be. Whatever the two of them had in the snow country, in the house that belonged to neither husband nor king, this was something meaner, and they both walked into it with their eyes open. The bed was her marriage bed. The roof was her husband's roof. They lay down under the canopy of nothing, and it fell. No slam, no clang of a trap, just a settling, soft as dust. The finest work the finest maker ever made coming down over the two of them, and then the whole engineering of it drawing tight at once. The war god surged up against it, and the surge accomplished nothing, and I want you to feel the particular horror of that from the inside, because we have been inside something like it before, you and I, sitting in a bronze jar in the dark. The strongest being on any battlefield gathered his whole strength against a handful of threads he could not even see, and the threads declined to care. He could find nothing to break, nothing to grip. His power needed an enemy with a face, a wall, a door, a line of men, and the net was none of those things. It was pure patience, drawn out to wire, and it held him the way winter holds a river. The front door opened. The business trip was over. It had never begun. Hephaestus stood in the doorway of his own bedroom, looking at the thing he had known he would see, and it broke out of him in a great cry, and the cry brought the family. That was the design. Sentry, that was always the design. He shouted for the gods to come and witness, come and see what the two of them had made of his house. And up the halls of Olympus they came crowding to the smith's door. The male gods came. The poem is exact about the guest list. Poseidon came, Hermes came, And Apollo, the goddesses, stayed home. Every one of them. Modesty, the poem says. And so it was the men of the family packed in that doorway, looking in at desire and war netted together in one bed, and the injured husband standing over them, itemizing his grievance at the top of his voice. The bride price he had paid, the mockery of his lameness, the plain wrongness of it, demanding his gifts back from Zeus, the matchmaker himself. And then the sound this chapter exists for. The sound started somewhere in that crowd of divine faces, and caught, and spread, and became what Homer calls unquenchable laughter. Laughter without end. The gathered gods roaring wave after wave. The halls ringing with it. The Greeks laughed at this scene for centuries. Century. And I am not going to pretend it is not funny from the doorway. But we have not spent our night in the doorway. We have spent it at the cold end of the map. And from where we stand, the scene reads a little differently. And I will only point once at what the laughter was landing on. It was landing on the one god with no armor against it. Mock Apollo, and the insult burns off in his own brightness. Mock Hermes, and he mocks back better. But laughter aimed at Ares had nowhere to glance off, because the whole terrible engine of him ran on being taken seriously. And every god in that doorway knew it, even inside the joke. The poem keeps a small hard stone of respect. Apollo turns to Hermes in the crowd and asks, grinning, "Would you trade places? Would you wear the net for the company in it?" And Hermes answers, "Bind me in 3 times the chains, and call all the goddesses to watch besides." And the laughter doubles. Read that answer twice. Half the men in that doorway would have traded, and the laughing was easier than saying so. One god did not laugh. Poseidon, the old sea, who had stood on a grey hill not long since demanding law against the god in the net, stood in the doorway, now watching the family enjoy itself. And something in him had had enough. He stepped forward, and he did not make a joke. He asked the smith to release them, formally, and name terms. The adulterer would pay the penalty, the full compensation of the wronged husband, and if Ares slipped the debt, Poseidon himself would stand for it and pay in his place. The word of the sea, offered as bond. In front of witnesses, the smith took the deal. The genius net went slack, and the 2 inside it were gone in the same instant, in opposite direction. And the directions are the last thing the poem gives us, and they are perfect. She went south, to Cyprus, to her sacred island, where the Graces bathed her and dressed her and set her back together, because beauty has its own country to heal in. And he went north. Of course he went north. Century, you knew before I said it. To Thrace, to the snow, to the one country in the world that had never once laughed at him. And the poem lets him go without another word. And so will we. The laughter died out in the halls, the way laughter does. The family found other amusements. And here is the quiet fact that outlasted the whole roaring scene. The fact the jokers in the doorway would have done well to notice. The scandal changed nothing. The decree stood. The marriage stood on paper. And her heart went right on, ignoring both, because you cannot legislate the tide. When the poets of the after years counted the children of Aphrodite, the children she bore, in the long run of the story, the father's name that stands beside hers, again and again, is not the husband the king assigned her. It is his, the one in the net, the one they laughed at. Time, which saw the whole scene, kept its own score, and her children are the next watch of the night. Every family is an argument between its children. Look at any household long enough, at the different weathers that come out of the same 2 people, and you will see the argument running. This child, their thunder. That child, their calm. Now stand back and look at the strangest match heaven ever produced. War and love. And ask what children an argument like that one has. The old world gave its answer. And the answer is 3 names. The first 2 you have already met. They have been running at the chariot wheels since the early watches of our night. Phobos and Deimos. Fear and dread. The twin boys who follow their father into every battle that was ever fought. And now you know their mother. And the knowing changes them. Or ought to. Because think about what fear actually is. At the bottom of it, under the shaking hands, a man with nothing to love is a man with nothing to lose. And a man with nothing to lose does not break and run. Fear is what love feels like on a battlefield. The potter in the 3rd rank is not afraid for himself. Not mostly. He is afraid the way a man is afraid who has a wife at a kiln and 2 children and a mother. Afraid as the sum of everything at home that needs him back. The Greeks did not write that sermon, and I will keep it to 1 line and let it go. They just did the genealogy, cold and correct, and let it sit there for 3,000 years. Fear and dread are what war fathers on love. No poet ever improved on the arithmetic, but it is the 3rd child I brought you here for, a daughter. And when the 2 most scandalous powers on the mountain, the god the family laughed at, and the goddess the king could not control. When war itself and desire itself had a little girl, the name they gave her, the name the whole ancient world knew her by, was Harmonia, harmony. I am not going to explain that name. I am going to make you the same promise I have kept all night. The Greeks did not name their gods the way we name our children, hunting something that sounds nice. Their names were findings, verdicts. They looked at a thing until they saw its true working, and then they said what they saw, and what they saw when they looked at the child of war and love. I will let you turn over in the dark on your own. They did not name her by mistake. That people never named anything by mistake. And her story now bends our whole night back on itself. Because you have been waiting on a wedding since a man with a sword stood over a dead dragon at a spring. And the wedding has come due. Cadmus. Remember him. 8 years the founder of Thebes served the god of war for the blood of the sacred serpent. 8 years paid out day by day. And when the last day was paid, heaven did the thing that heaven, on its best days, occasionally does. It did not just release the debtor, it rewarded him past all sense. Zeus himself decreed the settlement, and the settlement was a bride, and the bride was Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, given to the dragon slayer. The 2 bloodlines joined. The debt transformed into a family. The man who killed the war god's beast would marry the war god's daughter. And the city seeded from the dragon's teeth would be ruled by the dragon's owner's grandchildren. Sit with the shape of that settlement a moment. It is either the coldest peace treaty in the old stories or the warmest. And after all these years I still cannot decide. And I have stopped trying. The wedding itself, though, on the wedding the sources all agree. And what they agree on is that there had never been anything like it. And there would be only one more like it in the history of the world. The gods came down, all of them, sentry, down off the mountain, out of the halls. The entire shining family of heaven descending to a raw young city in the hills of Boeotia to sit as guests at a mortal man's marriage. The muses sang at that wedding. The gods carried gifts through the streets of Thebes like any neighbors coming to a feast. And mortal Thebans stood along their own walls watching Olympus arrive at their one-day-old gates. Only twice was that honor ever paid. The poets say, here, and 1 generation on, at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, where a golden apple would roll across the floor and start the count that ends at Troy. But that shadow belongs to the other wedding. This one, let it shine. The daughter of war and love in her bridal crown, the wanderer, prince who followed a cow to a kingdom, the muses in voice, and at the tables, drinking mortal wine under a mortal roof, the whole family of heaven at peace for one evening, her terrible grandfathers and laughing aunts, all seated, all civil, all glad, even him, especially him, father of the bride, the poets, having seated the family, do not tell us where Ares stood or what he felt, and by our rule I will not invent his heart. I will only remind you of the record as we know it, and let you seat him yourself. A god who came down a grey hill acquitted because he answered for one daughter, a god whose whole long story holds not one feast in his honor, not one hall that brightened when he entered. And now one evening in Thebes, the entire family gathered, gifts in their hands, music in the air, everyone glad to be exactly here. And the occasion, the whole reason for the light and the singing, is his little girl. Let him have the evening. The night watch can spare him one. But there was a gift at that wedding, and I cannot let this chapter close without it, because the gift is the hinge where the shine of the evening turns. Among the presents laid before the bride came one past all the others, a necklace, worked gold, the finest small thing ever made by the hands that made it. And the hands, most of the old tellers agree, were the hands of Hephaestus. Some accounts say it came to the bride by way of her mother's own treasures, a gift passed down, and you sat up a little just now, hearing the maker's name, and you were right too, the smith, whose nets we know, the craftsman with every reason under heaven to look darkly on this particular bloodline. And here I owe you the honesty of the night. So here the layers in order, that he made it. The tradition holds what he meant by it. No, early source says it was the later tellers, looking back down the corridor of everything that happened afterward, who began to whisper that the gift had been aimed, that the patience of the workshop had simply found a longer road. Maybe they were right. Maybe a beautiful thing is only a beautiful thing until the world teaches you to read it. All the record itself gives us is this. The necklace of harmonia went around the bride's throat that evening in Thebes, to the sound of the muses singing. It was beautiful. Every source agrees it was beautiful. And down the generations of Thebes it went, mother to daughter to queen, and everywhere it went, ruin followed, quietly, patiently, a step behind the shine. Wearers of that necklace burned with their cities. Wearers of that necklace watched their sons kill each other under their own walls. 4 generations of the house of Cadmus paid and paid, until wise men in the after ages, telling the long, sad glory of Thebes, would shake their heads and say, "The trouble came in with the wedding gold. I am not going to walk you down that whole dark corridor tonight. It belongs to other stories and other watches. I only wanted you to see it laid in the bride's hands while the music played. The old world believed some debts are not cancelled, only deferred, and compounding, whatever the smith intended. The gold collected for 400 years, but that is tomorrow's sorrow, and the wedding does not know it yet, and neither does the bride, and I am in no hurry to tell them. Leave the torches burning in Thebes, leave the muses mid-song, and the tables loud, and the father of the bride at whatever seat he chose. In the 1 hour of his long story where the whole world was glad he existed, the children of Ares are not all gods, though that is the next country of the night, scattered down the map of the old world, in palaces and on horseback. Mortal sons and daughters of the war god are growing up with their father's iron in them, and their stories are rougher than a wedding. One of them rules a nation of women who bow to no one. One of them is standing in a road that the strongest man alive is about to walk down. The fires are banked. The bride is dancing. Sleep now if sleep is close. Sentry, nothing on the road tonight can get past the man we have on watch. Ride east now. Sentry, east and north of every place we have been, past Thrace even, out along the southern shore of the Black Sea, where the old maps started guessing, to a river the Greeks called the Thermodon. The land out there is grass and sky and more grass, made for horses the way a harbour is made for ships. And if you sat a while on some low rise in that country, on the right afternoon, 3,000 years ago, you would have heard something coming that no other country on earth could have shown you. Woof beats, a great many of them, moving together, with a discipline you could feel through the ground, and then over the rise, riding hard and easy at once, the way you ride when the horse is not transportation, but family. Would come the cavalry of that country, bows short and doubled back on themselves, built for shooting from the saddle, crescent shields, spears carried with the plain competence of long use, and long hair tied back for business under helmets of bronze, and every rider a woman. The Greeks called them Amazons, and they could never stop talking about them. That is the honest first fact of this chapter. For a people who kept their own wives and daughters behind courtyard walls, the Greeks were helplessly fascinated by a nation out east where the women rode, ruled, fought, governed, and did not ask. They put Amazons on their temples. They painted them on 10,000 vases, dueling their greatest heroes and very nearly winning. They told and retold every story about them, with that particular energy a person spends on the thing they cannot decide whether they fear or admire. And after all these centuries, the telling itself is the tell. Nobody spends 400 years drawing a thing they find silly. An entire nation of warrior women, holding its own country by its own spears, answering to no king anywhere. And when the Greeks asked the natural next question, where could such a people possibly have come from? The answer seemed obvious to everyone in the ancient world. They were his, daughters of Ares. That is the standard genealogy in the old accounts. Said plainly, the way you would state anyone's hometown. The queens of the Amazons traced to the war god himself, in the most common telling by way of a nymph called Harmonia. And I want to pause one breath on that, because you heard the name. A different Harmonia, a nymph of the wild places, not our bride of Thebes. The old sources hand us two bearers of one name and two roads that do not meet. And I give you both signposts, honestly, and leave the map the way I found it. Either way, the trunk of the tree is the same. The riders of the Thermodon were the war god's line. Their queens wore a war belt as the sign of rule, the way other kings wear crowns. And the belt of the greatest of those queens, the one item, was known across the ancient world by its pedigree, the belt of Hippolyta, given to her by Ares, a father's gift to a ruling daughter. And it will cost her everything one day, when the strongest man alive comes sailing east to take it for a king's spoiled daughter. And that is a story that grazes ours tonight and passes on. But feel the weight of the plain fact first, because after the watches we have kept tonight, you have earned it. All night we have walked with a god the poets fenced out, a wide space around a chair, a jar the surviving record shows no search for, a doorway full of laughter. That is the Ares of the poems. And the poems were written in the south, in the tidy country, by men at safe desks, and out east, in the grass. The old world located a whole nation that told it differently, a people who put his name at the head of their family tree and were proud of it. Sons claim inheritance. Sentry, daughters claimed him. The Amazons worshipped Ares as their father god, sacrificed to him, carried his blood as their patent of rule. And the Greeks, who feared them, never once found that strange. Of course, the unbowed women of the East were his, Who else on the mountain would a nation like that descend from? And I will give you one more turn of it. The one I find I think about at 3 in the morning. The Greeks locked their own daughters away. And their nightmare, the story they could not stop telling, was a country where the daughters had spears. And when they dreamed that country, they made its father the god of the spear itself. The people who would not honor Ares with their love honored him with their fear, and told the truth about him by accident. His daughters, in the deep grammar of the old stories, are the women. No one hands to anyone. No nod in a bright hall decides an Amazon. Somewhere under all the vase paintings and the temple friezes, that is the quiet engine of the fascination. And I will leave it right there. One turn and no sermon. As promised, names come down to us out of that grass, and 2 of them matter to the rest of our night. Hippolyta of the Belt, the queen whose story tangles with the strongest man alive, and another, younger, in the telling, a queen the later poets loved above all the rest of that nation, Penthesilea, daughter of Ares by every account that names her. Keep that name beside you in the dark, the way you kept 2 others earlier tonight. She is far away right now, out east, in the wind and the grass, and her hour is far away too. But the road of this night bends toward Troy. All roads in the old world bend toward Troy. And when we get there, in the late fighting, she is going to come riding down that road with 12 companions, into the 10th year of the war, straight at the greatest killer who ever lived. I pay my promises on this watch. Hers will be paid before the plane goes quiet. The grass moves. The riders pass. Somewhere out there a father's belt is worn as a crown, and the nation that wears it fears nothing under the sky. Come back west now, back into the tidy country, because not all the children of the war god got a nation and a genealogy of queens. Some of them got only their father's iron and a bad idea. And one of those is standing in a road in Thessaly right now, in armor, waiting for travelers. And the traveler coming up the road toward him is the one man in the whole mortal world he should have let pass. There is a road in northern Greece, in the horse country of Thessaly, that runs toward the shrine of Apollo at Pagasae. And in the years this chapter happens, ordinary people had stopped using it. Word does that work in the old world. No signs, no proclamation, just travelers who set out and did not arrive, and pilgrims herded the long way around, and a name passed from fire to fire with a look attached. Cycnus, a son of Ares, a mortal son, this time, and everything the poets say about him runs one direction. He was strong the way his father's line ran strong, and he had taken his inheritance out to a public road and turned it into a toll. He robbed the pilgrims driving their offerings to the god's shrine, which took a particular kind of nerve, stealing from travelers under Apollo's own eye. And the old accounts add a detail past robbery, the kind of detail that tells you the whole man, from the skulls of the travelers who fought back. He was building something, a Templar, the stories say, or the start of one, to his father. Let that sit exactly as the sources leave it, ugly and unexplained, because I will not soften him and I will not decorate him. Tonight of all nights we are not going to pretend the war god's blood ran gentle in every vein. It ran hot and it ran hard, and in this sun it ran wrong, and the record does not tell us whether Ares grieved the wrongness or missed it. And you know the rule by now. What the record tells us is that the father did not disown it. Where this son fought, the father was known to stand. Whatever the family upstairs thought of Ares, Ares kept his own, and the whole ancient world knew where to find him. Beside his children, it is the best thing in him, and it has been the best thing in him all night. And this chapter is where the best thing in him walks into the worst possible afternoon. Because, up the road, dust on his feet, lion, skin, over one shoulder, comes a traveller who has never once gone the long way around, Heracles, and I need 1 minute to size him for you, because the rest of the chapter runs on it. Son of Zeus, strongest of all the sons of Zeus, strongest mortal thing that ever walked, the man whose labours emptied the ancient world of its monsters one by one. He had strangled a lion whose hide no spear could cut. He had carried the sky itself on his shoulders while a Titan ran an errand, and given it back, which is the harder half. And he was, by every account, exactly the wrong man to stand in front of with a toll in mind, because he had his own iron in him, his father's thunder crossed with a mortal mother's stubbornness, and a temper that had levelled larger obstacles than a bandit prince. The road to Pagasae ran one way for everybody else that year. It was about to run one way for everybody. They met where such men always meet, in the open, with witnesses of the divine kind. And Cycnus, who had spent his whole short life winning, looked at the shabby lion-skinned traveller and saw one more skull for the wall, and called his challenge. And the challenge was accepted before the echo settled. The old poem called The Shield of Heracles carries this fight, and it stages it with the whole sky watching. Athena arrives beside Heracles, and pay attention to that arrival. Sentry, because you have seen this formation before, on a dusty afternoon at Troy, in the first minutes of our night, the grey-eyed goddess, standing at a mortal champion's shoulder. The pattern is assembling itself again, piece by piece, and Ares is on the wrong side of it again. And nobody in the story can see it, but you, chariots wheeled. The two champions came together with a crash. The poem spends its best bronze on, spear on shield, the horses screaming, dust standing up off the plain in a column, and it did not last long. Sentry, that is the terrible mercy of it. Cycnus was strong, and Cycnus was his father's son, and none of it mattered, because there are gaps between strong and strongest that courage cannot close. A thrust came in over the shield rim, into the neck, exact and final, and the robber of the pilgrim road went down in his splendid armour, like a tower coming down, and the road to Pagasae was open, and somewhere a wall of skulls stood unfinished forever, and then the sky tore, because the father had been watching. Of course the father had been watching. When has he ever not been where his children fought? And what came down onto that plain in the next heartbeat was not grief in any human shape. It was Ares at full burn. The wall of sound, we stood inside in the third watch of this night. The terror that breaks shield walls before the chariot arrives, dropping out of the sky at the man who had just killed his son. Spear first, at a speed no mortal eye could hold. And here, for one long moment, the whole night stands still and looks at itself. A father over a dead child, striking with everything he is. It is the trial hill again, with everything reversed. On the grey rock in Athens, he was the one who struck for a wronged daughter and was called just. Now his son lies in the dust, in the wrong, killed cleanly in a challenge, his own mouth issued. And the father strikes anyway, because fathers do. And the law is not on his side this time. And the law has a name and grey eyes and is standing right there. Athena caught the spear, not with drama. That is the cold heart of the moment. The poem says she turned the point aside as it came, the strength of the throw spending itself into empty air past her hand, and the war god's full force went exactly nowhere, and she spoke to him while he hung there spent. And the words the poem gives her are short and older than pity. Hold, she told him. It is not given to you to kill this man. He did not hold. Credit him that. Sentry, or charge him with it. The record allows both. He went in again, hand to hand now, at the man under her protection, grief swinging iron, and Heracles, braced by the goddess, met him low and drove a spear point into the thigh of the god of war. Immortal flesh tore. Ichor ran, the bright blood of the deathless, and the great form of him buckled to the dust of the plain beside his son. And the fight was over, because Athena ended it, and it had always been hers to end. The poem gives the field one last quiet image, and I will hand it to you unimproved. Phobos and Deimos, the two boys who follow their father everywhere, came down with the chariot, and gathered him, wounded and beaten, up off the ground beside the body of their half-brother, and bore him away into the sky, toward Olympus, where healing was, and where welcome was not. The team that pulls the noise of the world, pulling slow for once, carrying the family's losses home. He healed. Gods do. The thigh closed. The ichor stopped. The strength came all the way back. None of that was ever in question. The sources move on briskly, and the fight at Pagasai becomes one more entry in the long ledger of Heracles, filed and forgotten by everyone whose son it was not about. I will only leave one small stone on the road before we walk on, and it is a plain one. Twice now the knight has shown us what his strength could not do. It could not open a jar from the inside, and it could not stand a child back up. Every power in creation has a far edge, a line where it simply stops. And tonight we have walked all the way out to his and stood on it in the dust of Thessaly. Whatever else the old world said about Ares, and it said everything. It never once said he did not come. He came for Alcip. He came for sickness. Wrong as sickness was, he will come again before this night is out. At Troy, for a son whose name I have not given you yet, and it will cost him more than a wound in the thigh. But not now. Now the road is quiet, and the pilgrims are moving again on the way to Pagasai, and the dust has settled over the plain, and far to the north a fire is lit in a timber hall, and a god is home, healing, with his boys seeing to the horses. Let the north have him a while. The next watch of the night is a gentle one. I give you my word. No spears in it, no trials, no laughter in doorways, just the creatures and the quiet places that belong to him, the woods and waters of the war god, the corners of the old world where his name was kept without a single battle in earshot. The night is deep now, and deep night is when a story shows you its still places. Sleep if you are sleeping. The boys have the watch, both of them, one at each wheel. I promised you a gentle watch, and here it is. No armies in this chapter, no family, no verdicts, no doors. This is the hour of the night when a story stops marching and simply walks its own land. And the war god had land, more of it than you would think, scattered down the map of the old world in the quiet corners, springs, groves, islands, creatures, the places where his name was kept by things that never once asked him to win. Start in the east, at the far edge of everything, in the kingdom of Colchis, where the sun comes up out of the sea. That is where the old world kept its most famous treasure, and the treasure hung in his trees, the golden fleece. Sentry, the fleece of the flying ram, gold to the last curl of it. The prize, a whole generation of heroes sailed to the end of the map to take, and here is the detail. The adventure stories always hurry past. When the king of Colchis received that treasure and needed somewhere to keep it, somewhere no thief and no navy and no clever hand could ever reach, he did not build a vault. He carried it into a grove of oaks that stood sacred to Ares, and he hung it on the oldest tree, and he set a serpent at the root of it. and walked away, and slept fine. Think about the logic of that, because it is a kind of compliment no temple ever paid. A sacred grove worked in the old world, the way the deep vault works in yours. The god's name, on a piece of ground, was a wall higher than walls, and when the richest king in the East went looking for the one name strong enough to guard the one treasure everyone on earth wanted, the name he chose was the war god's. The serpent under the tree never slept. The accounts say, never once in all the years. Eyes open through every midnight, coil on coil around the root of the oak. The second great serpent of our night. His creatures kept his law, the way the dragon at the Theban spring kept it. Everything that comes here answers to me, and out in the sea off that same coast, the sailors of the old stories knew an island they gave his name to, the Isle of Ares, a hard little shelf of rock in the open water, and the birds that nested there were his birds, and they were not gulls. The old accounts say those birds could rain their feathers down like arrows, sharp enough to wound a man at his oar. And when the Argonauts themselves, the best crew ever assembled, had to pass that island, they did not fight the birds of Ares. They put up their shields in a roof over the whole ship, the way soldiers roof a column, and they clashed bronze and shouted to drive the flock up, and they rode under their own shield wall past his island, quietly, like men crossing a great courtyard trying not to wake the house, the best heroes of a whole generation. Sentry, rowing softly past his birds, his animals ran through the whole bestiary of the old world, and each one tells you a little of how the Greeks actually saw him. Off to the side of the poems, the dog was his, the warhound, the animal that holds the yard all night and asks no wages. The vulture was his too, and I will not pretty that up. The old world was honest about what follows armies, but above everything, always, first and deepest, the horse, his team we have known all night, flame and terror and din and their brothers, but past the divine team, the horse itself, the whole animal, ran partly under his name. Horse country was his country. We have seen it all night without saying so. Thrace of the horse herds, the Amazons, a nation in the saddle, Thessaly of the plains, where the chariots wheeled, wherever the old maps show you wide grass and hoofbeats, you are near his ground, and scattered through the tamer country, closer in among the farms and towns. There were smaller holdings, a spring here, a stand of oaks there, plots of ground held in his name where no battle had ever been fought and none ever would be, tended by local people in the local way, with offerings at the right season and a wide, respectful margin the rest of the year. The travellers of the ancient world would pass them on ordinary roads. A walled grove, a spring with old dedications, and be told whose it was, and touch nothing, and walk on. That is the whole chapter. And I told you it would be gentle, but lay the pieces side by side before you drift, because together they say, the thing I brought you out here to hear, the poems, made in the bright cities, kept a god who was all noise, welcome nowhere, laughed out of doorways, and the land itself kept a different ledger. The land gave him the guarding of treasures, the watch over springs, the birds that hold an island, the dog that holds a yard, the serpent that never sleeps, the horse that carries you home, everything the old world trusted its knights to ran partly under his name. The cities told the jokes. The countryside locked its doors with him. The night is at its deepest right now. Out where you are, and out where we are. In the grove at Colchis, the serpent's eyes are open. On the rock island, the birds are settled, feathers sheathed. In the north, the horses stand asleep on their feet the way horses do, and the fire in the long hall is down to its last red. Let everything stand its post a while, because far to the south of all these quiet holdings, on a windy plain beside a narrow sea, there is a city with high walls, and the city is called Troy, and the years of its trouble have come. The night has been circling that plain since the first minutes of our watch. Sentry, and you have known it the whole time, and the circling is over. What is left of our story happens there. Every family has one quarrel that finally pulls in every member of the house. For the family of Olympus, that quarrel was Troy. You know the frame of it, because everyone in every age knows the frame of it. A prince of Troy named Paris was asked to judge which of three goddesses was fairest, and he chose Aphrodite, and his prize was the most beautiful woman alive. And the woman was already married to a king of Greece. She left with the prince, or was taken by him, and the old accounts argue that word to this day. And her husband's brother called in every oath and every king in the Greek world, and 1,000 ships went east. And the greatest war of the old world sat down in front of the walls of Troy and stayed for 10 years. That is the mortal war. Our business tonight is the war above it, because heaven did not watch Troy. Sentry, heaven enlisted. The judgment of Paris had handed out 1 prize and 2 grudges, and the grudges wore crowns. Hera, queen of the gods, passed over, would see Troy burn to the waterline. Athena, passed over, wanted the same, and had the patience to engineer it. Poseidon carried his own old grievance against the Trojan kings and brought the sea in on the Greek side. Against them, for Troy, stood Apollo with his silver bow, and Aphrodite, whose judgment had lit the fuse and whose beloved mortal son fought in the Trojan line. And with Aphrodite, where the night has taught you to look for him, came Ares. I want to be honest about how he chose, because the Iliad is honest about it, and the honesty is strange. By the poem's own account, Ares had leaned Greek at first, had even promised Hera and Athena as much, and then he went where she was. Aphrodite stood with Troy, and so the war god's chariot came down on the Trojan side. Promise or no promise, and the Greek Poots, whose whole sympathy ran with the Greek ships, never forgave him for it, and never quite managed to make it sound like anything other than what it looks like from the cheap seats. He followed her, the one door that ever opened for him. He went where it was, so the board is set. And now look at how the two sides actually fought, because this is the heart of the chapter, and it is a thing you can only see from directly above. The gods of the Greek side made war the way management makes war. Hera worked the king of the gods himself, the long game, steering the weather of Zeus's moods. Athena worked the field like an architect, arriving at the exact shoulder at the exact moment. A word here, a spear turned there, force applied through mortal instruments with no waste and no fingerprints. Even Poseidon moved mostly in surges and withdrawals, pressure and release. A god managing a front, command staff, sentry, brilliant, bloodless, and high above the dust. And then there was the Trojan side's loudest asset. And you have known him all night. And you know he never once, in his existence, stayed high above the dust. Ares fought at Troy the way he fought everywhere, which is to say, in it, down in the powder with the spearmen, shoulder height with mortals, rallying broken companies with that voice that needs no words, wading into the places where the line sagged. The Iliad shows him stripping armor, turning routes around with his bare presence, hauling the Trojan afternoon back from the edge more than once with nothing but noise and iron. The Greek poem hates his side and calls him every hard name it knows. Butcher, bane of men, curse of the walls, and the poem is not wrong to count that way. because we counted the same way in the third watch of this night. And the count was grief. But, being a truthful poem underneath its loyalties, it keeps showing you the same picture over and over. The gods of strategy, up safe on the high ground of the air, moving pieces, and the god of war, down among the pieces, getting dirty, on the losing side, because they were losing. Never forget that while you watch him work. Troy in the 10th year is a city bleeding out behind its own walls, outnumbered on the beach, its best prince carrying the whole defense on one set of shoulders. The winning side had the numbers, the fleet, and 3 of the sharpest powers in heaven. Nobody standing with Troy in year 10 was there for the spoils. The gods who stayed on those walls were the gods who had someone inside them. Apollo had his city, Aphrodite had her son, and Ares, who had followed her there to begin with, found before long that he had blood inside the war too. His name was Asclepius, a mortal son of the war god, one of the many, a captain who had sailed from Greece. And here, the old war plays one of its bitter jokes, because the son had shipped with the Greek side while the father fought for Troy. Somewhere on that plain, in the churn of the fighting, a spear is going to find Asclepius, and the son of Ares will go down into the dust of a war his father is fighting from the other side of, and the roar of the field will swallow it. 1 death among 10,000, and the news will begin making its slow way up toward heaven. Hold that name with the others I have given you, Sentry, and hold it gently. It comes due in the next watch, and when it comes due, it will nearly break the sky. But the afternoon our whole night has been bending toward gets there first, because down on the plain, in the Greek center, something has begun that the oldest men on both sides have never seen the like of. One man has caught fire. A compact, wide-shouldered young king out of Argos is going through the Trojan lines the way a scythe goes through standing grain, and he is not slowing, and the ranks are peeling away from his path the way grass leans away from wind. He has already done a thing this afternoon that no man before him ever did. A goddess came down to the field, and he cut her, and she fled to her mother, crying, and the man went back to work as if wounding heaven were a chore on a list. His name is Diomedes, and standing at his shoulder, invisible, patient, grey-eyed, holding the reins of his chariot with the calm of an architect reviewing final drawings, is the goddess who has been engineering this exact afternoon since the judgment on the mountain. You have been here before. Sentry, you stood in this dust in the first minutes of the night, knowing nothing. Now you stand in it knowing everything. You know the jar, and the hill, and the net, and the wedding, and the boy dead at Pagasai, and the spear, Athena, caught out of the air with the cold sentence attached. It is not given to you to kill this man. You know the formation assembling on that plain because you have seen it assemble once already. At Pagasai, the champion and the goddess at his shoulder. And you know, the way the man in the chariot does not, the way the god rallying the far line does not, that everything our whole night is made of is now standing on the same field at the same hour. Ares has seen the fire in the Greek center. He is turning his team. The next watch is the one we came for. Stay with me if you are awake. Sleep through it if sleep has you, and trust me to keep it faithfully. Either way, the story now goes where it has been going since the first handful of dust. It begins, like so much of this family's history, with a conversation upstairs, but the one who climbed to have it was not Athena. Mark this, because the machinery of heaven matters here. It was Hera, the queen of the gods herself, watching the afternoon below tip toward Troy, watching her least favorite son wreck the Greek day on behalf of the side she hated, harnessed her own chariot, took Athena aboard, and drove up to the highest ridge of Olympus, to her husband, and asked her question with the smooth directness of a queen who already knows the answer. Ares is loose on the field, she said, ruining the Greek cause, against your own instruction, that the gods stand clear. Will you be angry with me, she asked, if I strike him from the battle? And Zeus, king of heaven, father of the god in question, husband of the goddess, asking, looked down at the plain where his son was fighting, and gave his answer, and the answer has a coldness in it that 3,000 years have not warmed. Do not trouble yourself, he told her. Set Athena on him instead. She knows best how to bring him pain. Sit one breath with the household arithmetic of that. And then we go down. A mother, asking a father for a free hand against their own son. A father, granting it, and naming which of his children hurts that one best, with something in the phrasing that sounds almost like praise. The poem does not pause on it, and neither will the fight. But you and I have kept a long night, and we have earned the one breath. Now down, with the grey-eyed goddess, fast, the way she travelled, off the rim of heaven in a stoop like a falcon's, down through the afternoon to the Greek centre, where a chariot is wheeling behind the fighting and a young king is catching his wind. She comes to Diomedes as the day's last gift. She lifts his driver out of the car with her own hands and takes the reins herself, and the axle groans. The poem says, at the weight it suddenly carries, a mortal and a goddess together, and then she does the thing that our whole night has been waiting for. The small, quiet piece of equipment on which everything turns. She puts on the helmet of Hades, the cap of the Lord of the Dead, the helm of darkness itself. You know that object if you have kept other watches with me. The third gift of the one-eyed smiths, made in the same forging as the thunderbolt and the trident, and its power is the power to be unseen, unseen by men, unseen by gods, unseen by the sun himself. Athena of the grey eyes, the finest tactical mind in creation, set the darkness of the unseen on her own head, and took the reins of a mortal's chariot, and turned the horses toward her brother. And Ares never saw her. That is the sentence the whole night has been building. So let it stand alone a moment, and then let me show you what he did see. He saw an enemy chariot coming at him through the dust. One man in it, the man who had been burning the Trojan afternoon. He saw the single greatest target on the field, and a clean line to it, and the day tipping on the outcome, and every simple thing his whole nature was built for laid out in front of him like a straight road. He had just stripped the armor from a fallen Greek, the poem tells us. Hot from a kill of his own, he turned to meet Diomedes with the joy of his trade full on him, and he struck first, as he always struck first, the strongest arm on the field, driving a bronze point straight at the young king's life. The spear crossed the gap, and in the air, above the yoke, a hand he could not see closed on the shaft and pushed it high. The smallest motion, a clerk redirecting a paper, and the killing throw of the God of War sailed over the mortal's shoulder and spent itself in nothing. You were there. Sentry, first watch of the night. You have been waiting the whole story to know whose hand that was. And now you know. And now comes the answer's other half, because Diomedes thrust in behind the miss, and he was strong, but it was never his strength that mattered. The poem is exact, and the exactness is the point. Athena leaned her weight onto the mortal spear. The unseen goddess drove it, guided it, put it where she wanted it with the whole force of heaven's favourite behind a young king's arm. And the point went in low, under the war, God's guard, into the belly, where the bronze kilt gaps. Then she wrenched it back out herself, and the sky broke. You have heard this scream once tonight. And I told you then how Homer measured it. And the measurement is worth its second reading now that you know everything it held. The god of war cried out as loud as 9,000 or 10,000 men, shouting together in battle. One throat doing the work of 2 armies. And up and down the plain, the fighting stopped. Greek and Trojan together. 40,000 living men gone cold at one sound, with no source they could see. They did not know what it was. You do. It was the strongest being on the field learning, in one instant, in the language of his own body, what had been done to him, and by whom. 13 months in the jar, the threads he could not break, and now a spear out of empty air, and behind it, when the pain let him see anything, the one signature he knew better than any other, his sister's patience, his mother's asking, his father's leave. He rose off the field like weather leaving. The poem gives it that exact strangeness, a darkness climbing, the way a thunderhead stands up off the horizon, and the men below watched the darkness go up and could not name it. Up through the bright thin air he went, bleeding the bright blood of the deathless, to Olympus, to the halls of his own family, to the foot of his father's throne, and there, hurt and furious, boy and God at once, he showed Zeus the immortal Ica running, and poured out the injustice of it. Athena loosed, Athena favored, always Athena, the wild daughter, you indulge in everything. And the poem lets him rage a while, and every complaint in the rage is true. Sentry, that is the terrible thing. Every word of it is true, and it does not matter at all, because the king of gods and men looked down at his wounded son, at the lawful child of his own marriage, bleeding on the floor of heaven, and gave him this: do not come to me and whine, you double-faced thing. Of all the gods who hold Olympus, you are the most hateful to me. Forever quarrels, and wars, and battles. That is all you love. You have your mother's temper, Hera's own, past all governing, and I think it is her goading that has landed you here hurt. But I will not have you suffer longer. You are my blood. Your mother bore you to me. Had any other god fathered a thing as ruinous as you, you would long since have been thrown deeper than the suns of the old sky, 3,000 years. And the words have not softened, of all the gods, the most hateful to me, said in the halls of heaven, in open court, by a father, to a son standing in front of him with a wound in his belly. I have kept the family's silences all night and let you weigh them yourself, and I will do the same here, because this needs no help from me. It is the only time in the whole of the old record that Zeus says plainly what he feels about this son. And what he feels is that, and he said it to his face, and the poets wrote it down, and it survived every fire and every century between that room and this one, and then, the same breath, he ordered the boy healed. That is in the record too, and it belongs to you as much as the curse does. Zeus called for Pion, the physician of heaven, and Pion laid on his remedies, and the immortal flesh closed as fast as fig juice thickens milk. The poem says, a kitchen image, homely as bread, for the mending of the god of war. They bathed him, they dressed him in fresh clothes, and he took a seat beside his father's throne. The poem says, glorying in his splendor, whole again, beautiful again, right at the center of the family that had just told him what it thought of him. The body mended in a minute. The sentence was permanent, and the hall moved on to other business, because this family always moved on to other business. But the war was not done taking from him, and the worst taking came later, on another day of that endless fighting, and the poem keeps it in its own place. So I will keep it in its own place too. The news of Ascalaphus came up the mountain the way news of captains does, late, and second-hand, his son, Sentry, the one I gave you a watch ago, dead in the dust of a war. His father was fighting from the other side of, and when word reached Ares in the halls, the poem gives us the truest grief gesture in all its 24 books. He struck his thighs with the flats of both hands, the old gesture, the body's own language of loss, the same strike of palm on thigh a mortal queen once made at a hearth in Eleusis on a different night we have kept. Gods and washerwomen grieve in the same grammar, and he was on his feet in the same motion, calling for his armor, for the team, announcing to the faces around him that he was going down to the plain to avenge his son, and that he did not care. And he said this part out loud. He did not care if his father's thunder left him broken among the corpses for it. Take note of the price he quoted. He knew exactly what his father's regard was worth. He had heard it itemized to his face, and he priced his dead son above the whole of it without pausing for breath. Phobos and Deimos brought the horses. The boys, doing the one thing the boys know, harnessing the team for their father's worst hour. It was Athena who stopped him. Of all the family, here, she was out of her chair before the hall could react. The poem says, fearing what Zeus would do to all of them if his ban was broken. And she caught him at the door, and she took the helmet off his head with her own hands, and the shield off his shoulder, and the spear out of his fist, and set them aside, and turned him around. The poem gives her hard words to do it with. Sit down. Your son is dead. Better men than he have died, and will. You cannot save them all. Cold as the words are. Watch the hands instead. The sister who had driven a spear through him stood in a doorway and disarmed him piece by piece. Gently, the way you take the car keys from a man who cannot be allowed to drive tonight. And he let her. That is the detail I cannot ever get past. He let her. The strongest rage in heaven stood in that doorway holding nothing. And then it sat back down, and the doorway was empty. And somewhere below, the war went on without him. There was one more hour for him at Troy. Late. In the wild last fighting when Zeus finally opened the field and let the gods go at each other. And in that hour, Ares went straight for Athena. The debt of the whole poem, calling her out by every grievance he had. And she ended it the way she ended everything. With economy. She stepped back, took up a boundary stone lying in the plain, black and jagged, set there by men of an earlier age to mark a field line, and she caught him with it below the helmet as he came on, and the God of War went down, 7 acres. The old translators say his body covered, sprawled in the dust, his hair in the dirt, his armor ringing around him. Homer's Greek measures him in the field units of a farmer, and I have always loved that the poem reaches for farm language at the exact moment war hits the ground. She stood over him and laughed, and told him he had still not learned how much stronger she was, and the goddess of victory walked away with the victory. The way she always did. He got up. He always got up. That is the one thing no one in either world ever took from him. And late in that same stretch of the war, after the poem of Homer closes its covers, the old singers of the after generations kept one more story of that plain. And I told you hours ago that I would pay it before the plain went quiet. And the hour has come. The later epics tell it. The songs that carried the war past Hector's funeral. And I give it to you as theirs. Penthesilea came to Troy, the queen of the Amazons, the daughter of Ares, rode in from the east with 12 companions, into the 10th year, into a city that had just buried its best prince and had no hope left to its name. She came for glory and for reasons of her own that the old accounts argue about, and it does not matter tonight. What matters is what the city saw. Troy had watched its men bleed for 10 years. And then one morning the gates opened, and a woman in bright armor rode out at the head of 12 more. straight at the Greek line. And for one impossible day, the war god's daughter did what the war god's daughter was born to do. The old songs say she drove the Greeks before her. They say for one day hope came back inside those doomed walls, wearing a war belt, and then she met Achilles, the greatest killer who ever lived, the one edge in the mortal world, sharper than her own, and there was nothing anyone in heaven or on earth could have done about the outcome. And her father, who had stood over sickness and been stopped, and stood in a doorway and been disarmed, was nowhere in the story this time. The later Poots, having killed her, could not let her go, and neither could Achilles. They say he lifted her helmet off in the dust and looked at her face and grieved. The bravest thing the walls of Troy saw in 10 years came out of the east wearing his blood. Sentry. She fought like her father, and she fell the way his children fell, and the man who killed her wept over the work. That is where the record leaves her, and I will leave it there too, because some accounts cannot be improved, only kept. So that is the whole answer. First watch to this one. How does the god of a thing lose at the thing? Like this, beaten through his own province, by patience wearing his family's faces, by a helmet that made his sister into empty air, by a mother who asked, by a father who healed the belly and salted the wound that mattered. And still, count what the plain saw, because the plain keeps fair books, even when the poem will not. Every day he fought at Troy. He fought it downstairs, in the powder, on the failing side, holding up strangers, while the powers that beat him worked from the high blue safety of the air. They won. Nobody ever said they did not win. The books only note where everybody was standing. Night has come down on the plain now. The pyres of both armies burn along the dark, like two harbour towns. Somewhere above it all he is sitting on the wall of heaven, healed and hollowed, looking down at the one province in creation that is his, where his son's ashes are, where his daughter's blood is, where his sister's stone is lying in the field grass, and nothing at all requires him until history itself does. And history will. That is not a hope. That is the next watch. And I keep my promises on this watch. As the night has taught you, the poems are finished with him now. The poems were never even half the story. What comes next is stone and smoke and sworn testimony. The things the real Greeks actually did in the real world when the singing stopped. And after that, a city on 7 hills that is going to read this whole long night of his differently than anyone who lived it. The fires are burning low on the plain. Both armies are asleep except the sentries. And you are one of those. And your relief is posted. Wounded and standing anyway. The way he stood every post he was ever given. Sleep. Sentry. The worst of the night is behind us. And I mean that in every direction. Set the Iliad down now. Close it gently. It has earned its keep. But close it, because I am about to show you the other ledger. And to read this one, you have to come down out of poetry altogether, into the world of stone and receipts, and things historians can put their hands on. The poems told you what the Greeks sang about Ares. This watch is about what they did, and let me say the fair thing first. So the ledger opens honest. The Greeks had their reasons. They were not wrong to be wary of this god, and they had watched what the thing he stood for did to their own towns. The burnt harvests, the sons who did not come back, the cities of their grandfathers gone to ash lines in the dirt. When they wrote him harsh, they were writing from experience. Keep that in one hand the whole way through this chapter. What goes in the other hand is what they did anyway. Knowing all of it, start in the south, in the hard valley of the Eurotas, in Sparta. You know Sparta, or you know its silhouette. Every American does. The 300 at the hot gates, the boys raised in barracks from age 7. The mothers with their one commandment, come back with your shield or on it. What the movies never mention is who that whole terrible machine prayed to. Because Sparta, the one city in Greece that organized its entire existence around war, did not treat the god of battle as an embarrassment. Sparta sacrificed to him, plainly and officially. And the young men, in the brutal training the whole world still names after that city, grew up inside his calendar. Not as a joke in a doorway, but as a working god of a working trade. And in that same countryside stood one of the strangest statues in the ancient world. And a real traveler saw it and wrote it down. So, this is testimony, not myth. His name was Pausanias, a Greek of the Roman centuries who spent his life walking Greece and recording what actually stood where. The first great travel writer, dry and careful and reliable as a surveyor. And near Sparta, Pausanias records, there stood an ancient image of a war god, the Spartans, called Enyalius, one of the old battle names of Greece, a name so close to Ares that most of the ancient world used the two for the same power. And the image was in chains. The Spartans had bound their statue of the war god in fetters, and when travelers asked why, the answer they gave was not shame. It was the opposite of shame. They kept him chained. They said, so that the spirit of war and victory could never leave Sparta. The one city that lived by him wanted him held fast, resident forever, a permanent citizen in bronze shackles. Read that with the whole night behind you. Every hall on Olympus let him drift to the cold end of the map and never once asked him back. The Spartans looked at the same god and chained him to their soil because they could not bear for him to leave. Nobody in the old world thought that statue was an insult. Everybody understood it perfectly. It is the strangest love letter in Greek religion, and it was written in iron. Now widen the lens, because Sparta was only the loudest case. Walk the whole map with Pausanias and the inscriptions, and his name keeps turning up in places the poems never prepared you for. There were temples of Ares in the cities of Crete, where treaties were sworn in his name, actual surviving treaty stones, where city-states put the war god's name on their sworn agreements, on the theory that no signature binds a soldier like his. And down in Arcadia, the old inland heart of the country, Pausanias found something better still. In the town of Tegea there was a tradition and a sacrifice the locals kept for Ares under a title I want you to hear in full, because it may be the least expected thing in this whole night. They honored him as Gynaikothoinos, the god feasted by women. The story behind it, as the townspeople told it to Pausanias, was this. Long back, an enemy army had come against Tegea, and the fight had gone to the worst place a fight can go, and it was the women of the town who armed themselves and turned the day. And when the victory feast was held, the women of Tegea sacrificed to Ares on their own, and gave no share of the meat to the men. And the town kept that memory alive in his cult for centuries. Turn that over. Sentry, the war god of the poems, the great brute of the doorway laughter, held one honor in the deep hills that no other god in Greece held in quite that shape. A feast kept by grandmothers, because once, when everything male and official had broken, the power he stood for had answered the ones who picked up the spears anyway. His daughters out east were a legend. This was a town you could walk to, and soldiers everywhere, from every city, whatever their city's official theology, knew the old habit of the trade. Before the lines closed, in that grey 10 minutes when the shield wall is one long-held breath, the prayers that went up from the ranks went up to the powers of battle as often as to anyone, sung in the war hymn or muttered into the rim of a shield. The generals dedicated their trophies to Athena in the bright squares afterward. The infantry dealt with the god of the dust beforehand. down where he kept his office. The old world understood that division perfectly and saw no contradiction in it. You plan with wisdom. You cross the last 100 yards with war, which brings us home, to the hill. I told you to set a stone on it, hours ago, and I have come to collect. Go back to Athens, to the grey limestone shoulder standing off the flank of the Acropolis, the bare rock where 12 gods once sat in the wind to hear the first murder trial in the history of the world. And the defendant was the god of war, and the verdict was acquittal, and the rock took his name and kept it. The Areopagus, the hill of Ares. Stand on it now, and let me show you what grew where that verdict fell, because Athens, the city of Athena, the headquarters of everything clever and managed and strategic, did a remarkable thing with that rock. When the Athenians, centuries on, built the machinery of their law, the council that judged their gravest matters, deliberate murder, wounding, the cases where a citizen's blood was on a citizen's hands. They seated that council on the hill of Ares, the council of the Areopagus, the most solemn tribunal in the most argumentative city on earth, sitting in the open air on the exact rock where their own tradition said the gods themselves had once heard evidence and refused to rule by rage. Real magistrates climbed that rock for centuries, real trials, real testimony, real verdicts, in the wind, under the sky, on his hill. The city of the sister ran its conscience on the brother's rock, and never seems to have found that strange. And neither do I, the first defendant anywhere. In the story Athens told about itself was a father who struck for a wronged daughter and then stood still and let the family judge him. Every defendant after him stood in that same wind, on that same stone, owed the same thing he was owed, a hearing before the verdict, and the hill was not done gathering history. Centuries later, with Greece long folded into Rome, a small travelling preacher from the East came up those same steps, a tent marker by trade, carrying a strange new story about a god who had died and come back. And the Athenians, who liked novelty better than anything, brought him up onto the hill to hear him out, the way that hill had always heard people out. His name was Paul. You can read his speech on the Areopagus tonight, in the drawer of most any American hotel room. In the book of Acts, chapter 17, one of the founding sermons of the Christian West was delivered on the hill of Ares, because that hill was where Athens took testimony, and the idea the hill stood for, that blood cases belong to a council and not an avenger, that the accused stands in the open, and the accuser speaks, and the judges listen, and anger waits outside. That idea is one of the oldest ancestors in a very long family line. The habit of hearing both sides before anyone is ruined came down through the law of Greece and Rome and England by 100 roads, gathering and changing as old ideas do. And one of its living descendants meets in your own country 5 days a week. 12 citizens in a jury box on a Tuesday morning in Ohio. Coffee, going cold, listening before they decide. I am not going to draw you a single unbroken line from the rock to that room, because history does not run in single lines, and this night does not deal in claims it cannot keep. I will only put the two pictures side by side, the way I have put pictures side by side all night, and let you look. A god nobody loved, standing on bare stone, getting a fair hearing, and a courthouse in the American Midwest, running on the same stubborn idea. 3,000 years downstream, the Greeks put their laughter in the poems, century, and their trust in the stone. The poems crossed the centuries singing, but the stone crossed working. It is late now, truly late. The hour when even the road outside your window has given up its last car. We have one country left, and it is the biggest one, and it is next, west of Greece, across a narrow sea. There are 7 hills by a muddy river, and on one of them, in a hut of mud and reeds, a story is starting that will swallow the whole Mediterranean world. That story begins, and I am not exaggerating, with a wolf, 2 abandoned babies, and him, the last full watch of the night. Next, Rome is going to read his file. The whole file we have read together. The jar and the net and the curse in the throne room. All of it. And Rome is going to reach a different verdict. West of Greece, across a narrow sea, the land comes up green and folded, and a muddy brown river winds down out of the hills toward the coast. On that river, in the years when Greece was already old, there was nothing much. 7 low hills, some marsh between them, shepherd, tracks, wolves in the winter, no marble anywhere, and it is here, at the far western edge of the story, in the mud, that the war god's luck finally turns. And I want you to watch closely how it happens, because it does not happen the way anything else in his long night happened. Nobody argues his case. Nobody repeals the laughter. What happens is simpler and stranger than that. A new people comes along, needing a father, and reads his whole file, and chooses him. But I owe you honesty first. The same honesty we have kept all night. The god the Romans called Mars did not start as Ares with a new name. He was older than the meeting of the two peoples, a god of old Italy in his own right, and from the very beginning of what survives. He was 2 things at once. He stood with the men when they mustered for the fighting season, and he stood at the edge of the farm, guarding what was planted. The oldest Roman prayers we have, actual surviving words, farmers' words, call on Father Mars to keep the blight off the crops, to walk the boundaries of the field in the spring procession, to guard the cattle and the household and the growing grain. The same God, in the same prayers his people said for 1,000 years, watched over the wheat and the war band, both, and no Roman ever thought those were 2 jobs. They were 1 job. Keep what is ours safe, the month that carries his name, and carry it, it still does, on the calendar, in your kitchen right now, the month of March, opened the old Roman year, because March is when the world thaws, when the legions marched again. Yes, and also when the ploughing starts. The Italians looked at the raw force the Greeks had penned up at the cold end of the map, and they housed it differently from the first day. They put it on the boundary line, facing out, the strength at the edge of the field. So when Rome grew up and met the Greek stories and folded the 2 gods into one, the way that age folded gods, everything Greek about Ares poured into an Italian vessel that was already shaped like a guardian. Samedon, different job. And then Rome did the thing no Greek city would have dreamed of in 1,000 years of dreaming. Rome made him the father of the family. Here is the story every Roman child was raised on. The story of the beginning. There was a princess of the old line of Alba Longa, Rhea Silvia, forced into temple service by a usurping uncle so that she would never bear an heir to threaten him. She was a Vestal, sworn to the sacred fire and to no man, and the god who came to her, the god by whom she bore twin sons, was Mars. The usurper did what usurpers do. The twins were taken from her, put in a basket, and set adrift on the flooding Tiber to drown quietly, the way inconvenient babies were always meant to drown quietly, and the river carried them and grounded them in the mud at the foot of a hill, under a fig tree, and out of the winter country came a she-wolf, come down to drink, and she found the 2 of them wailing in the basket. She did not do what wolves do. She lay down, and she nursed them. Every civilization keeps one image at the bottom of its memory, and that one is Rome's. stamped on its coins, set up in bronze in its forum, carried on its standards to the ends of the earth. 2 abandoned boys and a wolf, in the mud, under a fig tree. The city that would rule the world begins with the unwanted sons of the war god, thrown away by power, saved by a wild animal. A shepherd raised them. They grew up hard and quick in the hill country, and when they were grown, they came back, put their grandfather's cause right, and then walked out to the 7 hills to build a city of their own. They quarreled over it, because they were their father's sons, and one brother killed the other, because this family's stories never lie to you about the cost of things. And the survivor named the city after himself, Romulus, Rome, and Rome, from its first day to its last, called itself the House of Mars, the children of the war god, and meant it the way you mean your own last name. Feel the size of that turn. Century, after the night we have kept, the Greeks looked at Ares and asked, "What do we do with a god like this?" And their answer was a chair with a wide space around it. The Romans looked at the same iron, and their answer was, that one is our father, the empire that would swallow the whole Mediterranean, that would build the roads and write the laws that Europe still stands on, traced every drop of its blood, every legion, every consul, every marble forum, back through 2 boys in a basket to him. The least loved god of one civilization became the first ancestor of the next, and nobody voted on it, and nobody argued it. Rome simply grew up certain of it, the way you are certain of your grandfather, and they housed him like a father. In the heart of the capital, in the great forum the first emperor built, stood the temple of Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger, one of the grandest in the city, where the Senate met to vote on questions of war, where generals came before their campaigns, where the standards of the legions were kept like the family silver. Outside the old walls, along the river bend, lay a great green field where the citizen army had mustered since the beginning, and its name was the Campus Martius, the field of Mars. Young Rome learned to ride there, drilled there, voted there, and in time, on that same field of his, the first emperor raised a monument that I want you to hold as the last image of Rome tonight, because it is the whole strange truce of that people carved in white marble, the Arapaces, the altar of peace. Rome built its shrine to peace on the field of Mars, and saw no contradiction, because to the Roman mind there was none. Peace was not the absence of the father. Peace was the father standing at the boundary of the field, facing out, doing his oldest work, the work from the old farmer's prayers, keeping the blight off what was planted. The Greeks had asked him to be a scandal. The Romans asked him to be a fence, and he held it, in their telling, for 1,000 years. The names went everywhere the legions went. And then they outlived the legions. His month opens the spring on every calendar in every kitchen in America. March, the door of the year. His day rides in the middle of every week in half the languages of Europe. Martes in Madrid, Mardi in Paris, the day of Mars, which crossed into English wearing the name of a northern war god instead, so that even your Tuesday is his day in translation. Empire fell. The temples went to ruin, and the standards went to museums. The names never even slowed down, and one name went farther than all the others, higher and farther, and it is still traveling. But that name belongs to the last watch of the night, and the last watch is yours, and it is short, and it starts at your own back door. Come home now, Sentry, all the way home, out of the marble and the millennia, back to tonight, this actual night, the one lying over your roof right now. The house is quiet. The road outside has given up its last car, And I want you to step out the back door with me one final time, in your mind or in your socks, whichever kind of reader you are, and look up many nights of the year. In that sky, there is a light that holds steadier than the stars around it. Stars shimmer and dance. That is how the old sky watchers told them from the wanderers. This one burns calm, and it burns faintly red. A small ember set in the black, and human beings have been picking it out of the crowd since before anyone could write down what they saw. One people after another noticed that red one and reached for the same shelf of ideas to name it. Fire, blood, the business of armies. The Greeks, our Greeks, hung the name of Ares on it, and Rome, whose names outlast everything, called it Mars, and Mars it has stayed, on every star chart, in every language, through every century since, of all the family. Century, the whole shining household we have walked among tonight, the father of gods, and the grey-eyed sister, and the laughing messenger, and all the rest. It is his light your grandchildren will point at. The least loved god got the landmark, the one you can find from your own yard with your own eyes. No telescope, no learning, just an ember over the tree line, keeping its post, and it is not alone up there. This is the last gift of the night, and I have been carrying it for you since the third watch, and you knew I would not forget. In the year 1877, an American astronomer named Asaph Hall spent night after August night at the Great Telescope in Washington, hunting something astronomers had wondered about for 2 centuries. Moons. Did the red planet have moons? The seeing was bad, his notes say, and he was tired, and he had nearly given the hunt up. And the story goes that it was his wife Angeline who told him to go back up the hill and try one more night. He went back up the hill, and there they were, 2 moons, tiny ones, hurrying around the red planet, so small and so close that they had hidden in its glare from every eye before his. 2 small companions that had been running beside that red light through the dark, unseen. The whole time, Hall reached for names, and he reached where astronomers reach, into Homer, into the 15th book of the Iliad, where the poem shows the war god at the worst moment of his war, the day the news of his dead son came up the mountain, calling for his team to be harnessed, and the ones who answer that call in the poem, the ones who yoke the horses for their father's darkest ride, are his 2 boys. Hall took their names and set them on the 2 moons, and there they have stayed, Phobos and Deimos. There they are. Century. That is where the 2 boys ended up. Not in a poem, not on a vase in a museum, in the sky, over your house, in the actual sky. 2 real moons of rock and dust, wheeling around their father right now, tonight, as you lie there, exactly the way the old poets always said they traveled. Nobody planned that. An exhausted astronomer and his stubborn wife, and a hot August in Washington, and 3,000 years of story quietly completing itself overhead, and of all the scenes in all of Homer those names could have come from, they come from that one, the harnessing, the 2 sons answering their father on the day he lost a third. The family that would not keep him has scattered into books. The father and his 2 boys are still out there riding together. And any clear night, the red planet is up. Any American with a backyard can look and find the chariot, and we have been up close. That is the last turn of the last watch, within living memory. Your own species built ships and threw them across 40 million miles of dark at that ember, and set machines down on it, rolling machines with cameras and patient little drills. And the machines are there right now, tonight, this hour. Think about which of our machines we sent. because it is the closing of every account of the night. Of all the things humanity has pointed at the red planet, not one of them carries a weapon. We sent the most peaceful objects our species has ever built, our little rolling laboratories, our patients made of metal, and they trundle across his cold, red country photographing sunsets. And the country lets them. The God of War has hosted every visit, and every visit came in peace. And there is a sentence the Greeks never got to write. Century. And I am glad it fell to us. So here is where I leave you. The laughter in that doorway is 3,000 years dead, and he is the brightest red thing in your sky. The jar could not hold him. The stone on the plain knocked him flat for an afternoon, and the hill of his trial went on teaching the world how to hold a trial, and the family that let him drift to the cold end of the map has thinned into mythology, while he picked up a second career as a farmer's fence, a father of empires, a month, a Tuesday, a planet, and the night light over your house. Everything that went down in his story came back up. It just came up somewhere else. Later, wearing a different name, the way seeds do. And if you have kept other watches with me, you know that is the oldest law this family answers to. Now listen, the night is almost through. Out there in the dark, the frost or the crickets are doing their quiet work, whichever season has your yard tonight, and up above them, if this is one of his nights, the red light is holding its position, steady, unblinking, the way it held it over Sparta and over the 7 hills and over the plain of Troy, the way it will hold it over your street tomorrow night, and the night after, and every night your grandchildren ever step outside and look up. Every century knows the one mercy of the watch. And I told it to you at the very start, hours and centuries ago, when your relief shows up. You sleep. Look at the sky one last time. Then, your relief is on the wall. He has his 2 boys with him, one at each wheel, and his post has no end, and his eyes do not close. And of everything the old world ever said about him, the truest thing was the simplest, and both armies knew it. And now you know it too. He was always the last one to leave the field. Sleep now, sentry. The watch is covered, and every morning, so far, the sun has come up anyway, right on schedule, over a world still standing, which means the night watch held again, the way it has held for 3,000 years, the way it is holding right now, over your roof, in the quiet, in the red. Good night.